How do you create something that's different than everyone else? You do it differently than everyone else. Here at Copeland Creative, we specialize in telling captivating stories of wild people, wild things, and wild places. We don't just capture the story, we immerse ourselves in it. We are a diverse, multi-talented media house based in North Georgia, and if you have a story that needs told, we want to help you tell it.
What is up, folks? Welcome to the Redneck Tech Podcast YouTube live stream. This is episode number, whatever episode number it says in the title. As of this point, I am unsure of what that episode number is because I did not check. But luckily, future me will check and put the right one in the title so present you can see it now. As always, there is an audio-only version that is available wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And what I am going to do now is start that, and then we will roll into the podcast. Today we're going to be talking about color and sound for beginners. So I am going to start recording the podcast, and I'll see you guys in a few seconds. The Redneck Tech Podcast is brought to you by MikesArchery.com. They're a one-stop shop for virtually everything archery, bow hunting, and for your next outdoor adventure. Mike's Archery has been at the top of the archery game for over 50 years, and they want to give listeners of the Redneck Tech Podcast 10% off their entire online store using the code REDNECK10, all one word. Just put the code in before you check out, and your boys will hook you up. The guys at Mike's have always been good to us, and now they can be good to you too. Visit MikesArchery.com and get your gear now.
Right here. Yeah. You want it? Yeah.
All right, welcome to the Redneck Tech Podcast. I don't know what episode number this is, so you'll just have to look and see for yourself. But today we're talking color and sound, and with me in virtual studio is Joe.
Hello, everyone.
They can see you through the FaceTime camera.
I know. Hopefully it's good quality.
It's all right. I wouldn't say
decent quality.
I wouldn't say it's the best quality, but for what we're doing, I think it works.
Yeah, I got my aperture light here. Dome light, just looking great.
I do like the top quarter lighting you've got going on. I think it looks nice.
I mean, see, I would get it like more in front of me, but I've got to really do some reorganization in my office studio here because I have a lot of stuff, for lack of a better word, everywhere, and it needs reorganized badly. But for now, it'll have to do.
I think it's safe to say that I have a lot of stuff. I'm currently looking at, in front of me, an entire OBS streaming interface, an iPad to my right that has your face on it, and also mine, and then the entire Rodecaster board. I really feel like I'm kind of in a control center, and I'm not really sure I want to be in the control center. It's a lot of things to have to manage, but this is what we have to do for a remote podcast, and this is the first time we're trying this, so if it goes really poorly, if it goes really poorly, then we'll know how not to do it, which is generally how we find out how to do things, is we try the 75 ways not to do it, and then finally we get to the right way. But there's really no shortcut around that. So today we've got roughly two topics.
Yeah, I think so.
We're going to have Joe, if you caught that, Ranger was right.
That's the GSP.
Yeah, Ranger's right over there. He might be wandering around. You might see his tail going back and forth because he's restless and won't just stay still. But we got a question on the Instagram about how all of us went about leaving our jobs to start a job in this industry. So we're going to talk about that. Mostly Joe's going to talk about that, and I'll explain why before Joe starts talking about it. And then we are going to go into, I wouldn't say it's a really deep dive. It's kind of like a medium dive, like, you know, your first scuba certification dive into color and sound, because those are two elements of the video process that you cannot overlook. And so we will be talking about those. So I guess we'll start off with how we got into the industry. And I don't remember exactly who asked us this question, but more or less it was, how did you guys go about leaving your full-time jobs to start working in this industry? And obviously the root of that question is that generally in this industry and most other industries, when you switch career paths or you switch industries, you're probably going to take a little bit of a pay cut. And if you are going from a fairly decent or high paying job outside of this industry and you go to start doing this industry, you're definitely going to take a pay cut. I wouldn't say that the hunting industry in general pays very well in comparison to other industries. Obviously, you can make a living doing this because we all do. But also, when you first get started out and you don't have years of experience or a big portfolio under your belt, you're probably going to take a pay cut because you're more or less entering at a quote unquote entry level position. The reason we're not going to talk about my story is because it wasn't a huge jump for me. I was maybe 20 years old, 21 perhaps. I was working at an auto body shop, but on the lowest rung of the ladder. And so for me, I didn't have familial responsibilities. I didn't have a whole ton of financial responsibilities. I mean, I was driving a 1991 Ford Ranger that I paid $1,200 cash for 5 years earlier. And living in a one-bedroom apartment. And I mean, honestly, my diet at the time consisted of a lot of ground beef and whatever you use ground beef for.
Whatever fit.
Yeah, a lot of tacos, a lot of spaghetti, a lot of chicken breast, stuff like that.
Not good spaghetti.
Well,
not good spaghetti, for the record.
According to Joe, not good spaghetti. I thought it was.
Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't.
I thought it was fine for a 20-year-old. It was fine enough. But anyways, I didn't have a whole lot of financial obligations, and I wasn't making a whole ton to begin with. So, to me, the jump was not hard to take because it was just me, and I wasn't making a whole lot of money, and I went to also not making a whole lot of money. Joe, on the other hand, probably has a better take on that for the people who aren't like me and aren't single with no bills and no family. So I'm going to let Joe talk more about that.
Yeah. So, obviously, like Ryer said, my situation was very different. I had been running a mechanical contracting business with my dad prior to doing this now. And it was getting to the point where, Dad was getting up there in age, and he was getting ready to kind of start retiring a little bit. And my dad's the kind of guy that would work forever, but he's getting to the point where he was kind of ready to start bowing out a little bit, and I was kind of next in line. And we had a hard conversation about whether I wanted to continue and take the business over. And at that time, I did not. I really wanted to pursue this full-time content creation. And for me, it started really, I used to just film my hunts, and I would film kind of whatever, turkey hunts, deer hunts, elk hunts, whatever. And that's just really how it started. And then eventually I ended up starting a YouTube channel with a buddy and my brother. And that channel has grown pretty big over the years, but and that's kind of where it started. And I started getting better and better. And then I ended up getting some freelance work. And then I was doing that in the fishing industry, and then I got hooked up with Caleb actually by coming to the Redneck Tech class, and that's kind of where my life. I don't want to say started spiraling out of control, but it became, it became apparent.
It's been a downward spiral
It
since.
be,
This is the low point.
yeah,
He's found
just
himself
been
on a remote
downhill.
podcast.
Yeah, right. So that's kind of where, at the time we were doing Lee and Tiffany, and he needed a lot of help with that. And I started doing the math, and I thought, well, I think I can make this jump. So beginning of last year, which is 2023, I made the jump. But the question specifically was like, when do you know it's the right time, or when is a good time to make that jump into full time? And I think at some point, like, you have to just make the jump. But I don't always think like that's a great idea. For me personally, I'm 32 now. I've got 2 kids, both young. One's 5, one's almost 2. And right when I started, like, basically got hooked up with Caleb and started like really taking time off work to go do this. My son is special needs, and he got diagnosed with a syndrome called Williams syndrome. With that, he had to have open heart surgery. So he had open heart surgery in October. He was home for a week, and then I hit the road for 18 days. And I knew it was an opportunity that I had to take. But, my point is that this is much more difficult to do when you have kids. And I know some of you guys probably have kids, and wives and family and house and all that. So you kind of got to make sure that the time is right. There's no great time, and you do have to pull the trigger at some point. But for me specifically, I was fortunate that I was making really good money at the time. Probably the last 3 to 4 years, the business was doing well. I was making money. Everybody was. And I was able to put some money back. Well, when I would do freelance work, I created an LLC, and I would do freelance work, and I would put that money in an account, and then I wouldn't touch it. And then when, because I didn't need it to live off, it was kind of fun money, or however you want to say it, but I didn't touch it. I didn't need it, didn't need to pay my bills, didn't need it to save. But what I did do with it was I would save it up till the end of the year. And then, me knowing that I was going to make the transition at some point when that became a reality, I went ahead and used that money to purchase equipment. And Ryer can tell you, when we're looking for freelancers, part of that is having the equipment to do the job. Because there is some barrier to entry to a point. We're running FX6s, and you're going to be into that camera probably $8,000 with the lens and body and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would do, is I purchase all my equipment prior to, when I wasn't banking on content creation being my full source of income, because I knew I was going to have to take a pay hit, a pay cut. So that's what I would do. So basically, when I made the transition, I had every piece of gear, every piece of equipment, every lens, every camera body that I needed to make that transition. And I think that's an important part, because, like, if you're trying to freelance, or maybe you're going to work for an agency and they're going to purchase the equipment for you. When I first started, I was going to just freelance. So if you don't have to buy that equipment, it's going to be much easier on yourself and your wallet to not have to buy that when you're trying to make ends meet. So I was fortunate that that's kind of the route the route that I took. And it did make the transition smoother, because I did take a pay cut, a pretty significant one, because when my son had his issues, my wife was unable to work at that time. So we lost all her income. And then, when I made the full-time jump, I took a pretty significant pay cut. But I was fortunate. I had some money put back, enough to hold me over when things got slow. And then, actually prior to making that jump, I ended up kind of investing in some real estate stuff too. So that definitely helped. I understand everyone's got a different situation, but that's really my situation. it was not a hard transition. It was definitely something that you have to get used to, but um, there really isn't a great time. Like I said, my recommendations would be just to save some money, get your equipment before you make that jump while you don't need that extra income, or be disciplined enough not to spend all that money that you're making on the side and be able to put it away and really make that jump. Because the last thing you want to do is like try to get hired for your job and it's a big job or what it is, and then you don't have the equipment to do the job and then you have to go buy it. And you're just made like $1,000 for your first month of freelancing or something. It's going to be tough to make that transition. But and then if kids, if you have kids, that's something to think about too. You gotta, with this job, you are going to travel. There's no doubt about it. So you have to be able to be away from your kids. And it was, I'm kind of used to it now, to be honest with you. And honestly, when I'm home for like 3 weeks and these kids are getting rowdy, like I'm ready to leave anyway. But, it's definitely something that you have to take into consideration if you have kids, because you're not just dragging yourself into the deep end at that point. You're dragging your family, you're dragging your kids, you're dragging everybody. And if you're someone like me that had a house and everything and 2 cars to pay for, it's my wife, and then your kids need stuff. It can be a tough transition. And truthfully, the first year was not the easiest for me. I never told anybody that, but it was not easy. There was a lot of arguments with my wife, and there was a lot of arguments and trying to explain to your kids what you're doing and like why you're leaving. And then, so there's that aspect of it too, but it gets easier. You just kind of got to get used to it. But, now we're in a better place, but there was a time where me and my wife were about to get in the boxing ring, but, and she would have lost, for the record, but we were about to,
I don't know. Maybe if it was regulation, but something tells me she might pull some punches under the belt if the situation merited it.
Zero.
No.
She has zero shot. Zero.
Just to be fair, we're not advocating for that. We're not, the Redneck Tech Podcast does not advocate for fighting your wife in a boxing ring, unless of course it's all in good fun.
That is true.
Which you did go in the with your brother, wasn't it, in Vegas?
Yeah, there's actually a video circulating the internet. My brother and I got in the boxing ring. I'm not going to say that we were drinking, but I will not say that we were not drinking. We were in Vegas for SHOT Show. Me and my brother got in there and duked it out. And we had Mexican before.
Who won?
Well, it's hard to tell. My brother, state trooper. He's a pretty fit guy. But I'm pretty scrappy. But it's hard to tell who won. Depends who you ask.
I don't know. The video looked kind of like he had won to me. I'm no expert on boxing, but you ended up on the ground or the floor of the bouncy, a couple times on the bouncy thing. So,
well, we had all this Mexican beforehand, and I'll be honest, like I was gonna throw up. Had we had gone another minute, I definitely would have thrown up.
Well, on that note, I guess unless you have anything additional to add, should we start talking about color and sound?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything additional. I guess the only thing is like if you, and I'm not trying to like say that I'm this or that, but like I had a pretty good excuse like not to say yes to some opportunities. And at the end of the day, if this is what you want to do, you just gotta say yes, and hopefully you have family that understands it. And if you're single and like you don't have anything tying you down, then you have, there's not really a great excuse at all. You just need to do it.
Yeah, that was kind of my situation. I obviously didn't have anything tying me down. At the time, I was in the process of enlisting in the Air Force, and the guy who I started working for in California came up to me, was like, hey, do you want to do this thing? I'd been doing it with him part-time for a period of time, and I was like, I mean, why not? You know what I mean? I'll do it for a year. You give anything a year, and if I was like, if I like it, cool. If I don't like it, then I'll just go continue enlisting in the Air Force and go
Not
that
do it.
route, you know? So to me, it was kind of
Right.
a win-win, and here we are. So I guess it
Yeah,
worked
and I
out
think
right.
well, I think, like if you're someone that's in my situation, like people are gonna pass judgment about what your life choice is.
Yeah,
They're gonna like a lot of people. The reality is like a lot of people don't understand what we do. They don't understand like why someone in my situation would do what I did. So like if you're someone that's like got a good job, the kids, and then you just like burn it all down, like uh, like there's some people that are not going to be okay with your decisions. They're going to judge you. Like my grandma, she's still like, you don't worry. My grandma's very Italian, for those that don't know, and she, she'll like have me over the house, then just berate me for the next 2 hours, but just because she doesn't understand it. She'll be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, oh. She's like, "Do you work?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." And then she's like, "You don't work." She's like, "Why would you do what you do?" Every time I see her, but um, you know, and then when you're not showing up at events during hunting season, and people's friends are like, "Oh, Joe's never around," the whole thing. So you got to be ready for some criticism if you got kids and a family, and this is what you want to do, because everybody's going to judge you.
yeah. I mean,
Just a matter if you care or not.
I think also you could say that it is the hunting industry, but I mean, this is not this isn't an experience that is outside of the norm for anybody who is going and switching career paths or moving to a new state or starting a new business. I mean, everybody who has done all of those things, I think, experiences the same amount of,
Correct.
there's a little bit of a social backlash to it. There's a little bit of confusion. People are like, well, why would you move states? Or why are you changing your career that you've had for X amount of years? Or, you're taking such a big risk by quitting your job and starting this business venture. That's a very common thing. And generally, they don't understand it first. And you just kind of got to go, well, I want to do it. That's what I'm doing. And, it is the hunting industry. So, we can talk specifically about that. There's a lot of things in this particular line of work that may be more unique than starting a business in your hometown or something like that. But at the base level, I mean, you're kind of doing the same thing that a lot of people have done hundreds of times, thousands of times. And, the same advice that somebody might give you if you're looking to start your own business is probably applicable to, changing into this career. And for the most part, I mean, 75% of guys are probably going into business for themselves in this industry on the media side.
Yeah.
There are production companies, obviously. There are companies that hire in-house people, but by far and away, a lot of the industry is built on the back of freelancers and hired guns, more or less. So the reality of it is, especially starting out, you're probably going into business for yourself. And so if you view it through that lens, it might kind of give you some direction to go in and kind of some expectations to have.
Yeah, I mean, I think 100%. And just to be transparent, like my first like couple of months of freelancing, like full time, like didn't have any other source of income, like it was not going well. And it was going well. It was going well in the sense of like you're kind of living the dream, but like the reality is, sometimes you think that you have some work lined up, and the reality is like you don't. Like people change their minds. Companies say they want to do all this work and they have XYZ lined up, and then that month hits and they scrap that, or they don't do it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where it's important, I think, to have some kind of savings account to fall back on, because that is very much what happened to me. We made it work, and then obviously went full time with Caleb. He called me, and that was that was the direction that I went. But and it was a better deal for me, right now and everything. So, but that's something to think about,
He has to
because
say
everyone
that.
says they have all this work to do. Yeah, I have to say that. you know, but I mean, it really was. But because, like I said, everyone has all this work until they don't.
Right.
And like they say, hey, I have all this work on the books. We're gonna hit the ground running. New year, we're gonna film this. We're gonna film that. Put all this content out. And at the time, it was in fishing, and for whatever reason, there was like material shortages or what. It could be anything, and hey, we can't drop this bait this month because we don't have the material to do it. So then, they're not worried about you.
Right.
It's so you got to have something to fall back on,
Right.
or you don't, you should not pay your bills. That's also an option. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's an
Bankruptcy.
option.
It's always an option.
yeah. Yeah. Right.
You can't be a starving artist if you're not starving, right?
Yeah.
All right. So with that,
That's one way to look at it. Yeah.
With that, we're going to get into the more technical part of the podcast, and we're going to be talking about sound and color, two things that everybody wants to know about, and are both very important to the pipeline of video production. One of which is a lot sexier to talk about than the other, but it is not as important to the video, I think, as the other. The sexy topic that everybody wants to cover is color, because everybody wants shots that look good. The not so sexy topic to talk about is sound, but arguably, and I think you'll find this across the board, is if you talk to anybody who's done this for long enough, they are going to say the same thing I'm going to say now, which is that you can get away with subpar footage and subpar color. It's very hard to get away with bad sound. People do not want to watch something with bad sound. And sound, when it's good, it usually flies on the radar. It's not something that people take notice to, and that is the kind of telltale sign that the sound and the sound design and the sound mix is good in a video. Color is something that people take notice of. So very rarely, unless you're talking to somebody in the industry, are you going to have somebody come up to you and be like, oh man, that piece sounded great, right? They're going to say that looked great. I like the colors, I like the shots, I like this, that, and the other thing. Very rarely are they going to say, oh man, your sound mix was awesome. I love that sound design you did. Oh, those sound effects really helped to cement the piece together. But the reality of it is if your video sounds bad, people probably won't even continue to watch it. So, that being said, we're going to cover some stuff to help you guys make your videos look better color-wise and look better sound-wise. And I made some notes. I've got 1, 2, 3. I've got 3 pages of notes. They're not full like A10 printer paper pages. They're just like little scratch notes. But I was thinking about, originally, when we were going to talk about this, I was thinking about it in terms of post-production. But with sound and color especially, your results in the edit suite are directly impacted by the choices you make on location and on set. So I wanted to start with the things that you should be doing on location before you even get into the editing suite, to make sure that your footage is well prepared and you're well prepared for color correction and color grading and sound mixing your footage. Good to go on that, Joe?
Oh, I'm good.
We
Which
good?
I actually have an example, a sound example today.
Today of a video you're
If
editing?
no, last night. No, I was watching some like super sick dinosaur cartoon with my daughter last night, and before bed, and this is how sound like impacts impacts the viewer, impact. So there's a dinosaur like walking through, like they were going into this it was like a pen, you know, and they like they like he's going in there like feed these
Is this
birds.
The
Or
Land
I,
Before
I don't
Time?
even know the
Were you
name.
watching The Land Before Time?
No, but it was like the land of before time dinosaurs, whatever those things are, you know.
Like
And
the species of
like
dinosaur?
yeah, but I don't know what it was.
Like the
You know what I'm talking
Stegosaurus?
about? Like long-legged.
They got
Yeah, kind of like a stegosaurus
long-legged and
looking thing.
long-necked, or did they have those little fan things on their back?
Yeah. No, long leg, long neck, dude. Old
Oh,
long neck.
that's probably a Brontosaurus.
Yeah, I think
Something like
that's what it
that.
was.
One of many.
Yeah,
There's a few of them.
anyways. Yeah. So I think like I think sound impacts us subconsciously as we're watching a film or a video or whatever it is. So in this particular scene, and it was not like a scary scene. It was a dinosaur walking through a fence, but they use music to set the mood of it. And so kind of going along with like sometimes if like people, yeah, they recognize color, you know, but some people really don't. Like they don't recognize any of that. But if your audio is bad, or if your audio is enhanced, like in this particular scene, they threw in kind of like scary music,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So you know what, like take my daughter, like she has no idea obviously about, you know, Rex 709 or what, you know, whatever it is, but she heard that music in there, and then she's like curling up into me, you know, like a walk, like a dinosaur walking through a fence, and I'm like, what's the and you know, but she recognized in her brain that it was
Yeah.
scary just because of the music.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how, you know, if music and sounds are used properly, they can have a massive impact um, on a lot of people. And I think, you know, the majority of people that watch films and movies, they, you know, they really love a movie um, because of the way that it made them feel. And if you can use sounds, and I think a lot of people like movies a lot of times because of the sounds that they hear and how they feel when they're watching it. If you can use those correctly, you can make your films and videos way more impactful.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens subconsciously that you don't even really realize if it's done well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But anyways, that's my dinosaur story for the night.
I
It
like
actually was a pretty good movie, honestly.
It was a movie.
Yeah, it was a movie. It was kind of like Land Before Time, but like kind of updated and more edgy. It was kind of cool.
Edgier Land Before Time. All right.
Yeah, it's
Like little
trust
emo
me, dude, it's better
dinosaurs?
than watching. No, not like that. Here's what I mean. It's better than watching toy trolls on YouTube, which she loves that too.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah,
Well,
you know, people like playing with action figures and giving them human characteristics. Very strange.
you know, content is content these days. Somebody will watch it.
Yeah, apparently. The
All right.
sound sucks on that, and they still watch them.
Well, it is for kids, I guess, huh?
Yeah. Anyways, moving on.
All right. So, the first thing I wanted to talk about on location is sound. And if you're noticing, my camera seems to have a lag of some kind, and I don't know why it just started doing that. So, sorry guys. I'll fix that later. I'm not going to fix it right now. You guys are just going to have to deal with it. So while I'm talking about sound, my sound is not synced to my picture. And I don't know why. I actually saw a green flash on OBS, and then all of a sudden I'm like a couple frames out of sync. Maybe one frame.
See, but if you close your eyes and people just hear it, they're still getting an experience.
Yeah, so now if you're watching the video version, just close your eyes and it's now just the audio version. A little magic that we did there. So now you don't have to
Silky smooth voice.
Yeah, now you don't have to see the out of sync video feed that I don't know how to fix in real time. So anyways, getting into getting good location on, or getting good sound on location. The first thing, obviously, is you've got to have microphones, right? Just like if you're going to record video, you got to have a camera. If you are going to record audio, you need microphones. Now, a lot of cameras have an internal microphone. They're trash. Absolute trash. Do not use them. Literally, the second piece of kit that you should buy after you buy your camera is a microphone for that camera. Like, even before, I mean, you have to have a lens, but like, spend money on a microphone. If you buy a camera and then you don't have enough money for a microphone and a lens, then get a cheaper lens and grab a microphone, because that's how important it is.
Agreed.
And they're not super expensive. I mean, you can get lower end microphones that will do a good job. They're not going to do the best job, but it's going to be leaps and bounds better than the internal audio on your camera. Honestly, internal audio on cameras is not meant to be production sound. It's meant to be scratch audio for syncing that camera's video with actual audio recorded with other cameras that have good audio or separate audio recorders or whatever else. That's really the main reason they put those in there. So in order of importance for microphones, I would say number one is get a good shotgun microphone for your camera. If you are running a cinema style camera, there's probably a little holder on the camera where that is supposed to go. If not, a lot of guys will mount those on the cold shoe or the hot shoe on top of their DSLR or mirrorless cameras. Rode makes a ton of them that are really good. Honestly, most of them are probably going to serve you well. Just like anything, there are levels to microphones, and the cheaper it is, the lower the quality of that microphone might be. But you want to make sure you have a shotgun microphone. And essentially what a shotgun microphone is doing is capturing the audio that is in front of your camera. They have a lot of different pickup patterns and responses, but we're not going to get into all that here because it's not a super deep dive. We're just going to say that you want a shotgun microphone because it's going to pick up whatever sound is coming from the direction that your camera is pointing. So if you are filming a river, it's going to pick up the sound of that river. If you're filming somebody talking, it's going to pick up the sound of that talking. If you're sitting in the woods and it's quiet, it's going to pick up the sounds of the quiet woods. After you have a shotgun microphone, then the next thing that you want to do is get a lav microphone. And a lav microphone or a wireless microphone is usually a system of a transmitter or a body pack and a receiver that goes on your camera. And it's a wireless microphone. So you put this pack, the transmitter, on a person, and then you have a wired lav mic, lavalier microphone, that you clip to them somewhere, usually around the sternum area, if you can. And then that wirelessly sends the signal back to the receiver, which then inputs it into your camera. And this is really primarily used for dialogue. So if you have a subject, if they're talking, you definitely want to make sure that you have a lav mic on them. 9 times out of 10, these are the 2 mics that we're using in the field. All of us have a shotgun microphone on top of the camera, and all of us have a lav mic on the talent that we're filming. Occasionally, we might use an additional boom mic, which is just kind of another shotgun mic, but mounted to a boom pole or a limb of a tree or set out in front of a blind for different purposes. But if you have a shotgun microphone and a lav microphone, you'll be able to cover all of your bases. We all use different lav mics. I use a Sony dual channel system. Caleb uses the DJI mics. Clay now uses the Sonys, but he was using Sennheiser for a little bit. Sennheiser makes some that are really good. And then Rode makes some microphones as well. The Rode ones you've probably seen. They're those little square packs that people obnoxiously clip to the front of their shirts, pretending that I don't know there's an entire 2 square inches of mic hanging off their shirts. You can plug a mic, you could plug a lav mic into that, and then put the transmitter somewhere else where it's not right in front of my face. But there's a lot of options. Again, this is not a gear podcast today, and I don't feel like listing out every single piece of gear. But there's 50 million articles online that you can look up, like best lav mics, best shotgun mics, best XYZ, and they'll give you prices and all that kind of stuff. The important thing is just get the best that you can within your budget, and make sure that you're using those things. Obviously, they're not good if you leave them at home, or if you're like, I'm too lazy to go mic up my talent, or my talent is fighting me on having a microphone on, which is not uncommon. Your talent will be like, do I have to wear that thing? And you're like, well, do you want to get filmed today? You want good sound?
It's more common than I feel like it's more common than it is uncommon. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
which, you know, it seems hard. It's kind of hard to understand because like you're there to like get a product, like a good solid product, and like we're fighting over whether you should have good audio or not. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those things where you just kind of have to. There's a lot of things in this line of work where you have to put your foot down and be like, no, we gotta do this. Like we can work around whatever qualms you may have, but if we're here to film this, like I can't just have the
Which
shotgun.
you're really good at. You're really good about that. Just being like, yeah, I'm here to do this, and like this is what's happening.
Yeah, it's not always the best. Sometimes I have a little bit of an authoritarian approach to things, and it's good for situations like that. But then also sometimes it annoys people. But hey, look, I don't want to get back into the editing room and have
100%.
just wind noise because the talent wouldn't put on the mic and we ended up on top of the hill where the wind was blowing 30 miles an hour and your shotgun mic is unusable at that point. So that being said, those are your two basic building blocks that we are going to come back to later on. The next thing is, now that you have the microphones, you have to listen to the microphones in headphones and monitor your audio and make sure that you're getting good audio. Audio is one of those things that it's kind of I call it a dark art. There's a lot of things in the audio world that you cannot see. Most cameras have audio waveforms. Most everything, like I have audio waveforms going right now, but you can see I'm still listening to my feed. Audio waveforms are great because they give a visual, they give you a visual reference for your mic levels. What they can't do is tell you if there's a weird hissing going on the mic. They can't necessarily tell you that there's a popping or a clicking. They might not be able to tell you that there's interference in the mics, or that when a person moves a certain way, you get a squelch or something like that. You may see it on the waveforms, but really what the waveforms are doing is telling you numerically how loud is the sound in this mic. So it's important to listen to the sound because, one, if it sounds good, it sounds clear, and it sounds loud in your headphones, then you're probably good to go. You're getting good sound. If you start hearing weird stuff, if there's hissing or squealing or clicking and popping, then you know, hey, I need to start troubleshooting this. The other thing that I would say is if you are listening through headphones, to make sure that you are aware of how loud your headphones are, because if your headphones are turned up to 100, well, then a very low audio level will sound much louder to you. And if you're not cross-referencing that with what you're visually seeing in the levels on your camera, then you might go, oh, well, it sounds loud to me, I should be good to go. Or it might sound too loud and you might be tempted to turn it down, when in reality, numerically, that sound is very low on the levels monitoring. Like here, I've got an independent level control for these headphones, so I could turn it up to way, way high, and it would cause me to want to turn down the feed because I'd be like, oh, this sounds really loud to my ears. But in reality, it's not loud. It's just that the headphones are amplifying the sound. So you really want to use your headphones in conjunction with the audio meter on your camera, so that the headphones are letting you hear the quality of the audio, all the sounds that you're getting, and helping you make sure that you don't have any weird noises coming in through the mics. And then by cross-referencing that with the levels, you'll be able to say, okay, it sounds good. it's in the range that I want it to be, which is generally as loud as possible without clipping, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, and I want to add, you'll hear a lot like, yeah, you can fix that in post or whatever, but the reality is that's not the goal. The goal is to get that audio right in field. Certainly there's things that you can do in the edit to enhance the audio or bring the audio levels up. But as you raise them, on some mics handle it better than others, but you could distort that audio, you could make it not as good as it could be. So the goal is always to get it right in field. And if you're not constantly monitoring, and there is some things with audio that you really can't get out, or it's very, very difficult to get it out. And it's a time thing too. At that point, you don't really want to spend a bunch of time fixing your audio that could have been handled in field if it was done correctly. And honestly, sometimes monitoring audio is kind of a pain, especially if you're running and gunning, filming a spot and stock type hunt, and you've got cords hanging all over your ear. It's just so easy to take them out and say the hell with it. But the reality is you need to keep those in your ears and really do your job, because that's really what it comes down to. That's part of your job, and it's important.
Yeah. Fix it in post is not something that I ever apply to audio, unless it's like the most minor. I know that I could fix it. Like there's a few, like I've got a weird room tone and it's constant. Okay, yeah, I know I could take that out in post. But like if you are not paying attention to your audio and you're peaking, which means it's in the red, it's going over the threshold of what is able to be recorded. You'll be able to hear that in your mic, in your headphones, so you'll know. But if your audio starts peaking after the point at which it is peaked, you cannot do anything. If you bring that audio waveform into an editing program, you'll see a flat line at the top where it's cutting off the peaks of that audio, and that is not recoverable. Kind of the same thing as like clipping your highlights in the video world, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but like that's not recoverable. If you record something incredibly quiet compared to its surrounding audio, well, there's not a whole lot of separation you can do there. If your noise floor is very loud and the person talking is not coming up high enough above that noise floor, then if you raise the volume, all you're doing is raising the noise floor too, and then it's just going to sound the same but louder. The clicking and popping, again, like if you get lucky, maybe it only clicks and pops when somebody's not talking, but more likely than not, it's going to click and pop while they're talking, and then they're going to be in the middle of the word and it clicks or pops or hisses, and it's very difficult to take those things out. There's people whose entire job is doing that, and it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of really specific technical knowledge and know-how to be able to do. To the point where, like, I've been doing it 8 years, and still, you just get sound, and you're like, yeah, I don't know how to fix that, because it really is. It's a whole other world. I mean, in larger productions, the person who does sound is not the same person who runs the camera, and the person who edits the sound is not the same person who edits the video itself, because that's how specialized it is. Same with color. But obviously in this industry, you've got to be a jack of all trades, and you've got to be able to do it all from, picking up the camera to delivering it. So you've got to have enough knowledge to be able to obviously deliver a good product. But sound is very specialized, and you want to get it right in the field. You want to get everything right in the field, but sound is especially unforgiving. Yeah. And especially if you don't know what you're doing and you are going and trying to fix bad sound, there's kind of this like uncanny valley of weird sound that you may have fixed an issue, but you've created another issue, and now that one is apparent. I know a lot of times when I try to fix bad sound, it just ends up sounding weird or odd or out of place. And then you're in the same situation you were before. You didn't really, you fixed an issue, but it still sounds weird and it still doesn't sound natural. And it's very difficult to fix audio and make it sound natural at the same time. So, insofar as you are able, make sure you're getting good audio in the field. Make sure you're using your mics. Make sure that your levels are correct. Make sure you're monitoring them. And honestly, you just kind of got to accept that audio is kind of a pain. I mean, I'm constantly fiddling with audio. Like, it's just, especially lav mics. Like, lav mics, always problems with lav mics.
Always.
And as many people as I've talked to, I had this conversation last week with some guys. I was filming a quail hunt down in Pemberton, Georgia, and I was there doing behind the scenes stuff. Blood Origins was filming a kind of the pilot episode of one of their a new concept that they're working on, and the two guys that were running A and B cam for that, you know, we're talking about industry stuff, as you do when you get in camp with a bunch of other videographers, and they were trying to mic up talent, and it was scratching and giving clothing noise and all this kind of stuff. And he was like, do you have any other ideas? I was like, no, we tried everything that I've ever tried. And he's like, yeah, I've tried every single thing in the entire internet, more or less, to try to reduce these problems. And I'm convinced that people just live with the mic noise because there's...
They do. They have to.
Yeah, you know, like, because I've tried hundreds of different ways of miking people up to try to avoid the noises that you get from having a microphone on a person, and I've never found a way to 100% get those out of there. You can do pretty good, but for whatever reason, it's just finicky. And then, of course, you know, you've got a microphone on somebody, they're sitting on mute buttons, they're bending cords, things are getting yanked out of pockets. I've had a whole microphone dunked in a slough before. I mean, it's just, it's always something with audio, but it's just part of the gig. If you're going to run a camera, you're going to be running audio equipment too, so you just kind of have to live with that.
Yeah.
The last thing that I would say for sound on location is to make sure that you get ambient sound of the environment you're in. You don't realize how important this is until you get into post-production. But if you watch anything, you'll hear usually a bed of constant sound that sounds natural. It sounds like the environment that somebody is in. And you don't really notice that, you know, this person starts talking and this person starts talking, and then there's this other sound, right? Because there's always this bed of constant sound underneath, and it's just ambient sound. It's environmental sound. It's there to essentially kind of set the scene aurally, and you have to get that on location. And you can fake it with, like, royalty-free sites will have ambience of different environments, but they're never 100% what that environment is, especially when you get into super hyper-specific environments, you know. I mean, like, trying to find what the New Mexico desert sounds like on a cool fall morning, you're not getting that on a royalty-free site. Like, you're gonna find some birds chirping, maybe you'll find like some wind rushing through the trees, but, like, you know, I was doing it the other day. I was trying to find something that would work on a royalty-free site, and I was like, none of them have this specific bird that I'm hearing in my footage. Like, I hear this bird, it's in my footage, but I can't find a track that's got this bird. And it's just, you're probably not going to find it. I mean, there's only so many royalty-free audio tracks that you can use. So when you're on location, you know, make sure that you take some time and give yourself 30 seconds to a minute of just location sounds. You know, just, you're sitting in the tree stand, nothing's going on, it's quiet in the morning, just hit that record button and sit for a minute. Tell your talent, hey, don't move, don't do anything. I'm doing a minute of just ambient noise. Hit that record button, let it eat for about a minute, and then turn it off, you know. And you do that there, you do that, you know, on a windy cliffside, you do that in a cabin, you do that in the desert, you do that in the mountains, you do that by the ocean, whatever. And you'll have that sound to use in your edit. And if you're smart, which I always tell myself I need to do this and then I don't do it, you can save those sounds for use later. Like you could export that clip and make yourself essentially your own royalty-free library of ambient noises that you can use for in the future if you get something and you're like, oh man, I really need the sound of this. Well, maybe you've got it because you went there before. You can do the same thing with like turkey gobbles, elk bugles, whatever other noises animals are prone to make. I mean, if you get a really good one, just save it. Like we've got some bugles and some turkey gobbles that if you've seen a video that we've made and it's got like a really good bugle and a really good turkey gobble in there, it's like the same one, low key.
Which, to be fair, they kind of, you can pretty much pass that on any bull or whatever,
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's like,
I mean, there are,
but I have definitely done that.
Yeah, every animal sounds a little different. Like they all have their individual voice.
Yeah,
but at the same time, it's like
you could have a growler.
Like you wouldn't know. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just don't like. You don't get a good bugle, and you're like, I need a good bugle for this moment. Wow,
Right.
hey, good news.
Right, like
We got that one we got like 3 years ago where he was
Yeah.
5 feet away, and it's like, what better bugle could you get than that? You know what I mean?
oh, I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah. We're not going to tell the people because
Uh,
then they're going to try to steal our bugle.
We know, but you don't know.
Yeah, they're going to try to steal our bugle, steal our turkeys.
Right.
Like I know right now exactly where to go to in the surfer if I need like a turkey gobble. I know there's a clip that's got like
Yeah.
25 of them and they're phenomenal. And there's not like random noise and
Yeah.
stuff. It's great. Anyways, you can do
Yeah.
that for yourself if you think about it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to add something as far as getting ambient audio. So obviously we're doing kind of a beginner surface level. You're going to notice like on your, if most of you guys are probably going to be running some kind of mirrorless camera as like your entry level, and obviously there's people doing it at our level that are shooting mirrorless. There's nothing wrong with that, but capturing ambient audio plus like a wireless lav mic audio as well is much more difficult on a mirrorless camera. So you will have to get some kind of splitter to split that audio into the 3.5 jack.
yeah.
Where like on our cinema cameras, we have multiple XLR ports, and we can have our onboard shotgun mic and then run our wireless too. But on a mirrorless, you're going to have a little bit harder time doing that. So you're going to need some kind of splitter cable to get that audio and get 2 tracks out of it. So, because that was always like a mystery to me when I first started doing this. I'm like, how do I get like 2 audios?
Dose audios.
Yeah.
Dose audios.
Like I know it needs to happen, but I don't know how to do it.
Yeah,
So
and then
that's
you'll
going to be one of your challenges with that.
And then you'll get into the situation where you think you found one and it like takes 2 inputs, but then it puts them on 1 track. And that's just as bad.
Yeah.
You do not want that.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I've
And then
finally
you
done
pull
it.
Premiere, and you're like, yeah. You get in Premiere, you're like,
How come I can't take the sound of this guy breathing all the way up this hill out of my clip? Oh, it's because it's the same. It's in the same track.
yeah, yeah. It's because you can't.
Yeah, you can't do it. No way.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why you got to have that
Right,
library of
right,
sound.
so-
All right.
Yeah, right, correct.
So let's talk about color now. This is taking. I mean,
Ooh,
I knew that this was going to take a long time. I don't know why I thought I could do this in under an hour.
I don't know. I got nothing. Do you got stuff to do?
No, Ranger's actually being nice, so we're chill. Did you hear about
I'm
the
hoping
time?
this takes us. Go ahead.
Did you hear about
Sorry, the delay's a little weird.
Yeah, the last time Clay and I podcast and Ranger decided to puke 3 times on the podcast.
I did hear about that.
Yeah, we had to restart the podcast thrice. Okay, let's get into color. This is the sexier stuff to talk about.
Oh yeah.
And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about your color space. And I'm going to say something inflammatory at the end of this. When you are shooting, you got to choose a color space, obviously. And really there's a million options. I would say most of the time, before we started shooting in log, which I'm going to talk about that's part of the inflammatory comment. I was shooting in Rec 709, and I was almost always choose the flattest, least colored profile that was available on that camera. Most cameras have a profile that's just kind of like neutral. And that's the one I would always choose because I wanted to be able to make my own decisions in the post-production process as far as like what I wanted to do to enhance that. Obviously, there's you don't have as much room to do that in a Rec 709 space, but you can do a fair amount. So let's back up a little bit and let's talk about, I guess, the three color spaces that you can choose. And there's a lot of technical details, and I know that there's going to be some terminology in here that I'm going to use not technically correct. So if you are a professional at color, don't come for me. I'm using some terms technically incorrectly because they're what are understood to be certain things. So color space, you've got raw, you've got log. Technically, you have hypergammas. We're not going to talk about those, but you do have them. And then you've got Rec 709. So your raw is something that you're going to get off of a very high-end camera. That's going to be something off of a Red. That's going to be something off of an ARRI. That's going to be something off of a Sony Venice. That's going to be something you could do with an external recorder of some kind. RAW is not technically a color space as much as it is a like a recording format, so to speak. Not like 1920 by 1080, but when you shoot RAW, you're not really shooting a video. You're recording a bunch of data, which then is fed through a program that reads that data and displays an image to you. That's why, like, if you go shoot on a Red, you can't just take the Red footage and view it in the Finder of your computer because the Finder doesn't know how to interpret that footage. The reason you use RAW footage is because it allows you to change a lot of the image characteristics after the fact. That being said, you have to change all of the image, like you have to do all of that work after the fact. And the image that comes out of the camera looks like trash. Like, it looks bad. You would see that image and you would go, that's a terrible image. Why did I pay $50,000 for this camera? Well, if you know what you're doing and you use the right image pipeline, that image will be able to look very, very good. In all things being equal world, you would shoot everything raw and process it and color correct and color grade, and that would be the highest quality image that you could attain, assuming you knew how to do all of those things. And that's a large assumption. It's a very important assumption, because if you don't know how to do all those things and you don't have the time to do all those things, the image that you're getting out of a camera that's shooting raw may not look as good as the image you're going to get out of a camera that shoots in a Rec 709. That's kind of like a hashtag skill issue. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you don't have the capabilities, it's probably not going to look better. In fact, it might look worse. Like, I've had to work with raw.
Way worse.
Like, I've had to work with raw footage before. Like raw, like red raw footage, not like raw footage. Red raw footage.
Like
I'm not
film, like actual film.
Yeah. I'm not the best. I'm not the best, and I had to do like extensive Googling just to figure out the workflow, the pipeline, the right way to do it. And I think I still did it wrong, and I was not super happy with my results. And I'm saying that because just because you can do something does not mean you should do something. And you got to be realistic with, like, do I have the skills to do this? And do I have the time to do this? Obviously, if you are working for yourself and you're just like, hey, I want to learn how to do it, yeah, go get a Red, shoot in RAW, and figure it out. Like, you can 100% do that, and eventually you'll get the right results. And if you've got all the time in the world to figure that out, cool. Obviously, I would at some point like to be able to say, yeah, I can handle red footage with no problems. And like right now, if somebody gave me red footage, I'd be like, okay, I can figure it out. But I'm not, like, I'm aware of my knowledge deficiency in that area, which then brings us into log. The reality of it is most people are not shooting on Reds. They're not shooting on Sony Venices. They're not shooting on Arri Alexas. Like, that's not what most people are doing. And if you're shooting on those things and listening to our podcast, then that's pretty cool. I'm jealous. Like, I'm jealous of that you guys get to shoot on those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And,
well, come to think of it, and then I pull an Arri Alexa out.
Yeah. They're like, Joe, where have you been hiding that Arri?
Remember how I said to buy things at the end of the year?
Yeah. I've got an Arri. That'd be phenomenal. I would then have to go take a lot of courses to figure out how to use that image.
Right.
Or pay somebody who knows more than me. That would be preferable.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah.
The reality of it is most people aren't shooting in RAW. You can, but most people aren't because there is a very large barrier to entry. However, these days there is kind of a quote-unquote hybrid between a Rec 709 and a fully RAW, which is a log image. Most camera manufacturers these days ship cameras with log capabilities. You've got Sony's S-Log, Canon C-Log. The drones have like D-Log or whatever. GoPros have GoPro, Cineform. Like, there's a ton of log profiles. And essentially what log is, it's a mathematical way to put more information into the picture. And it essentially allows you to capture more dynamic range so that you can capture more details in the shadows and more details in the highlights. There's a lot of technical stuff that goes along with that. But the reason it's called log is because if you look at the kind of like the exposure chart of the values, it looks like a logarithmic curve. It does not look like a linear curve, which Rec 709 looks largely like a linear curve. And you'll see that the steepest part of the curve on log footage is in the shadows, which is what's allowing you to get more dynamic range out of your camera sensor. So there's obvious advantages to this because it allows you to utilize more dynamic range, which means you can shoot darker darks and brighter brights and still capture them all in the image. It means that you don't have to make as many tough decisions as far as, okay, well, I have this dark thing and this bright thing. What do I expose for? Knowing that if you expose for the bright thing, you're going to lose all of your shadow detail. And if you expose for the thing in the shadows, you're going to lose all of your highlight detail. So it essentially allows you to be more flexible in your shooting process and handle adverse lighting situations a lot better. That being said, if you look at the image straight out of a camera that just shot in log, it also looks like trash. It doesn't look good. It looks very gray. There's no contrast. There's very little color. In fact, it looks so bad that if you shoot in log, you have to use a monitor LUT in order to really properly gauge what you're shooting and to pull focus and to see how your exposure looks on the monitor. So log has a lot of advantages. Its disadvantage is it takes a little bit more work to shoot, not a ton. The learning curve isn't crazy, but it is, you do have to learn kind of a new way to expose or expose differently than you've probably been used to shooting in a Rec 709. And then you have to utilize a monitor LUT. And then you also have to know a little bit more about the image pipeline and workflow process, because when you go and bring that into Premiere or whatever program it is, you have to be able to convert that log image into a Rec 709, which is usually done using a like a conversion LUT, which is provided by most camera manufacturers. But it takes a little bit more time to get it to look right, basically. So again, you're looking at the same kind of conundrum that you were looking at with raw footage. Is technically you can make a better image shooting in log, but you have to have the ability and the time to do that. It's not just something that you could just say, hey, I'm going to shoot in log, and all of a sudden your stuff looks magically awesome. Like, it takes more work, it takes more knowledge, it takes more technical prowess in order to do that. It's not to say that it's hard to learn that, but you do have to learn it. And you do have to you do have to do that. Like, you can't just shoot log and then deliver in log, which I've seen. This is the inflammatory comment. I've seen people deliver videos in log. Like, it's still log. I saw it on the television. I've seen it in the hunting space, and it baffles me. Like, you can't just shoot log and then deliver log. Like, that's not what it's meant for. Log is meant to be worked with in post-production and converted into a delivery color space, which is a Rec 709 type of space. So, like, you can't just shoot log and call it a day. Like, you have to work with it, and you have to convert it before you send that on to clients.
Yeah, and certainly don't go out like, and this is part of the issue. Like, if you go on YouTube, there's like a million color grading videos. So don't, like, if you're just getting in this, don't go out and just start shooting log when you haven't practiced it. And maybe, like, for your own personal stuff, if you're just practicing, like maybe just filming stuff and trying to put stuff together to kind of get your bearings. But if you're getting like paid work and you have not shot in log, certainly do not go out and shoot in log just because a YouTuber told you to. And we have ran into this on more than one occasion, because YouTube tells you to shoot in log, and as Ryer described, it is certainly better if you know how to do it correctly. There's massive advantages, but if you do not, it can literally ruin every minute of footage that you shot if you don't do it correctly. So don't just hop right into it. Practice if that's what you want to do. Get comfortable, and then once you feel comfortable practicing it, then you can make that jump and start doing it on some paid stuff if you're comfortable.
Yeah, it's certainly not something that you're just going to be able to, like, off the rip, like, okay, yeah, my stuff looks like this professional colorist who I watched on YouTube. Like, that's just not the case.
Yeah.
And, not trying to scare people away, it's not a super difficult thing to learn. But, like, before we started shooting all of our stuff in log, like, we went and did tests with the camera in different lighting situations, read a bunch of stuff, and really tried to understand exactly how it's working, exactly what that pipeline, that workflow looks like, trying to understand how it would work for us practically, because, again, like, you guys probably know this, you go to YouTube and you're like, hey, how do I do this, that, and the other thing? And you get a bunch of guys who shoot in studios or shoot on sets all the time telling you how to do this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, well, that doesn't translate to me running up a mountain after an elk. Like, that's just not the same thing. So we had to go, okay, how does this translate into what we do every day? And is it practical? Is it this, that, and the other thing? And after doing that, we went and shot it. The first thing that we shot in earnest in log was the UNG pilot. And the first day of that UNG pilot, we got the footage back and we're like, oh crap, we didn't, like, there were some problems with how we were exposing the image. They were fixable, luckily, because we had done some front end work, but still we got it back and we're like, oh, there's still things we got to iron out here. And we're still doing that, like, every single lighting situation is different. And every video is different, and trying to, it's like anything. You can learn all about it on paper, but until you take it out and you do it, you don't know what you don't know yet. And you will certainly learn new things when you go out and do it. So, log is definitely a decision that you can make, and there's a lot of good reasons to shoot in log. But at the same time, you have to make sure that you're prepared for those decisions and prepared for the workflow that log brings with it. And then moving on past log, you've got the Rec 709 color space, which is your standard color space That's your delivery color space in most instances. I'm simplifying this. There's a lot of delivery color spaces, but Rec 709 is basically considered a delivery color space. Most cameras ship from the factory in a Rec 709 color space. So like if you just get your camera out of the box and start shooting on it, it's probably shooting in a Rec 709. And that Rec 709 is going to most accurately reproduce the colors and contrasts that you're seeing in real life. So if you shoot something and then you put it on your computer, you could just export that and it's going to be good to go. Now, it may not look
Close. Yeah.
the prettiest that it could look. It might not have the amount of contrast that you'd love for it to have. Colors can still be kind of janky, but it doesn't look flat and lifeless and without color or contrast like a log or a raw image would. It's just going to be like, oh, that image is kind of like a weird color, or it's a little bright, or it's a little dark, but you could just deliver it. Rec 709, we shot in Rec 709 until literally this year. Even with the FX6, we were shooting in Cinetone, which is a Rec 709 space. I guess technically Cinetone is kind of like log with the
It's a hybrid.
with the LUT baked into it, so that when you get the footage on your card, it's already compressed into that 709 space. But for all intents and purposes, it was a Rec 709. If you pull your mirrorless out of the box, like I said, it's going to be shooting in a Rec 709. And if you're just starting to do this, I would suggest that you shoot in a Rec 709 color space until you're very familiar with the camera, very familiar with exposing your image, very familiar with white balancing your image, can do all of those things, understand how they work, understand how it looks and how it feels and everything in post-production. And then maybe you're like, okay, I want to step it up, then go to the log. But I would certainly suggest shooting in a Rec 709 color space until you're very comfortable handling that image.
Yeah, because you're essentially with Rec 709, you're given basically a painted canvas. Where log, you're basically given an unpainted canvas, and it's kind of up to you to paint that canvas how you would like. And that's why I like Rec 709. There's only so many color adjustments that you can make because all that information is already baked in. Where log, has I guess technically has more, but you're given a blank canvas to give it a feel, give it whatever you want. But it's very important to have those tools to know how to paint that canvas before you hop into that.
Right. Yep. So, before you start shooting, make sure you know what color space you're in. And if you're shooting with multiple cameras, make sure that you're matching the color space as closely as possible, just like you would match your technical specs, just like you're going to match your frame rate, your resolution, all of those things. You're going to want to match your color space as well. If everybody's shooting on the same camera, it's really easy. We all show up with FX6s. We're all shooting S-Log3, and it all looks the same because it's shot on the same exact camera. If you're shooting between cameras, but maybe they're all Sonys, make them all S-Log3 or make them all Rec 709. If you show up to a shoot and maybe you're freelancing and they're shooting log and you don't ask, hey, what color space y'all shooting in, and you show up and shoot 709, well, the editor is going to get it back and go, well, I didn't want 709, because now it's harder to match to the cameras that were shooting log because the image characteristics are not the same. Same thing the other way around. If you show up to a production and they're shooting Rec 709 and you shoot log, the editor is going to get it back and go, why do I have log footage? Or, I hope this isn't the case, but they may not know what to do with log footage, and you've just given them footage that now they don't really understand how to work with. So, make sure that you're shooting in the same color space. If you're shooting between camera brands, if I'm shooting a Sony and Joe's shooting a Canon, well, I have S-Log3, he's going to have C-Log, put it in those two color spaces. So at least you're log to log, and then you just know you're going to have some additional matching that's going to have to go on after the fact, and there's nothing that you can do about that. After you...
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's also an important question to ask prior to getting some work or working with a brand or whatever it is. If you're just getting into this, you you know, communicate with the company and ask, hey, do you want this delivered in log or Rec 709? You know, and if it's in, they want everything delivered in log and you're not comfortable with that, you either learn really, really quick or you just kind of decline the work. Because I think it's more important that you know, kind of upfront and honest. And maybe you lose that, but at least you don't give them trash footage. And then they have a, you know, certain thing in their mind about you, you know,
Right.
so.
Yeah,
But that's a question to have up front.
and I mean, there's also the consideration of, even if you're doing this project for yourself, do you have the extra time that it takes to work with log footage and work with
Sure.
raw footage, or is it one of those things where you're shooting it and it's got to be turned around and you don't want to fuss with it? Because I mean, that is the case, and especially like if you're doing things for social media, if you're doing things for very quick turnarounds, like those are reasons that you would choose a Rec 709 color space and you know, kind of take the L on the dynamic range and some of the colors, because the time frames that you need to adhere to are shorter. So there's a lot of decisions that go into the color space. Once you have figured that out, once you've set all of your cameras to that color space, even if it's just your one camera, the next thing, obviously, for good color is making sure that you're white balancing and exposing correctly. White balance is a pretty easy thing to do. If your colors look too blue or too orange or too green or too pink, you dial that in. You've got two controls. You've got white balance or color temperature, and then you've got tint. Your color temperature or white balance is basically how warm or cool your image is. If it's too orange, it's too warm. If it's too blue, it's too cold. Basically, what you're trying to do is make sure that all of your colors look correct. And the reason it's called white balance is because if you have a white object in the frame, it will look white. If your white balance isn't correct, then that white object will have a color cast that's orange or blue or green or pink or some combination therein. You can memorize a lot of different numbers that go with different lighting situations. I personally only have one number. I know that outside in the sun is 5500. So I know that if I'm outside in the sun and I set my camera to 5500, I'm going to be pretty close to correct white balance. If I get inside, I don't remember those numbers. I know that there's numbers. I don't remember them. What I do is I just don't. And like, it's hard because you could have 7 different types of light in a room. Like you could have daylight coming in from the outside and like LEDs and then tungsten lights and who knows what, or like regular fluorescent, incandescents, whatever. Who knows what the lighting situation is. And you've got this like mixture of all these color temperatures and tints. And like, you're not going to be able to be like, oh yeah, that's a 3245. You know what I mean? Like, you're just not going to be able to do that.
Spraying and praying at that point.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you don't have any other way to check it, you look at your camera screen and you look past your camera screen and go, yeah, it looks too orange or too blue, and then dial in your white balance and kind of adjust it by hand until you're like, yeah, that looks pretty close. It's not the best way to do it, but it can be done. The best way to do it is to have a white balance card. And I meant to bring it up here with me, and I forgot. But essentially, it's a card that's got a white on it. And you put that in front of your camera, and you tell your camera to white balance to that card. Every camera's got kind of a different control setting. But I can put that in front of my FX6, focus on it, hit a white balance button, and because I know and it knows that this color that it's seeing is supposed to be white, it will adjust its color temperature and tint to make it white. You can also do that with like a gray card. In a pinch, you can use a sheet of printer paper. I've used paper towels before. Like there's a lot of options
You
that
can use
have.
the cap on the Sony like lenses. You can use that,
Mm-hmm.
which I saw that on Instagram. Pretty slick.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different ways, but
Yeah,
you could find something white.
there's a white balance card for if people are watching.
Oh, there we go.
That's not like a great indication of one, but that's basically what he was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're watching the video feed.
Yeah. So you can use a white balance card. That's really the best way to do it. And what I also like to do is, especially for interviews, you can't really do this running and gunning. Like I can't like put a white balance card in front of my camera every time like a new lighting situation changes.
Hold on, let me
Yeah.
hold on, let me white balance this before you kill that elk.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. No, people are not.
That's
gonna
why
like
some studio stuff that like you'll see on YouTube, it's like some of it's not applicable to what we're doing.
Yeah.
You certainly try your best, but some of it is just not. That's why, there is kind of a disconnect between like some of those studio guys that are shooting like movies inside compared to documentary style we're doing. Sometimes you're not winging it, but like you are at times just getting as close as you can get it
Mm-hmm.
and just cutting her loose.
And sometimes you're just looking at your camera and you're going, that doesn't look correct. Like that's not.
Yeah.
I'm too warm here. I'm gonna dial that in or something. Like sometimes that's just kind of what's happening.
Yeah.
But in a situation where I can like take a white balance card out, if I put that white balance card in front of the camera, I'll also record a clip. And my white balance card it flips open. Apparently it was very expensive. I did not buy it. I was sent a link to the card.
They are expensive. Some of them.
Yeah, somebody sent me a link to the card, and then Clay was like, "Hey, I'm ordering stuff. Like, is there anything you need?" I was like, "Yeah, I get this white balance card." And I sent him the link, and then he bought it. And then Gail was like, "What did you just buy?" And I was like, "A white balance card." And it was like, I don't even remember. I still
gave him that purple card treatment.
Yeah, well, I still haven't seen the price of the card, but like I gotta imagine it was like a couple $100 by the reaction. Like a card for white balance was $200.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Sailed.
Yeah, it's nice because it's like hard plastic, so it doesn't get screwed up. Like I could throw it in my pack if I wanted to. I don't because like I'm not breaking that out on the mountain. But it flips and it's got like a white and a gray, and then it flips again and it's got like a color checker chart, which is basically a grid of known colors that you can use in color correction to make sure that your colors are exactly where they need to be. So in like a studio situation or an interview situation, I will flash that white balance, get the white balance, and then I'll record a clip and I'll make sure I have the white and gray, and then I'll make sure that I flip it over and I have that color checker as well. And essentially what that allows me to do is have a known reference to work off of when I take that into post-production. So at the very least, it's helpful to carry something white so that you can get your images close. If not, you can memorize some of the different like color temperatures for daylight and cloudy days and stuff like that and use it. But it's important to try to get your white balance as close as possible in the field, because it can be a real pain trying to color correct out a really blue, orange, pink, or green tint or cast. And then because you've got that cast, you will lose other colors. Like it'll cancel out other colors. So like if you've got a really orange shot, like you might be able to get it to not look as orange, but it's not going to quite look exactly perfect because it was so out of balance. You've essentially not recorded you haven't recorded the other colors. Like they're just not there. You can't bring them back because they just got covered by the orange essentially. So you want to make sure that you're getting that correct on location. And then next would be.
Should we talk about auto balance? Well, and then you're going to see a function on your camera too that says auto white balance. I think our recommendation is to not use that. And the issue is if you are in a perfect lighting scenario. A lot of times where, say you're in a studio, you're shooting like interviews in a studio and use auto white balance. Most of the time it'll be pretty good. Like you won't have any issues. But when you go outside and you have different lighting conditions and things are changing, that auto white balance is going to change mid clip. So if you're bringing it back into your editing suite and you're trying to edit it and like, you edit, obviously in a color correct in a clip, you're going to go to a part in the clip, you're going to look, well, then as you start to scroll further down that clip, you're going to notice that the color at the start of the clip doesn't look like it does at the end of the clip. And this took me a while to figure out because I was auto white balancing when I first got started, and it was actually changing the color mid clip. So it throws everything off. So you're much better, even if you just picked 5,500 and you ran with it. No matter what you're in my opinion, you're probably better off doing that than running an auto and letting it change through the duration of the clip, because it will. And again, if you're inside and you want to auto white balance, I don't see a ton wrong with that. Like we're probably not going to do that. But you can get away with it in there, but certainly outside, I would not run auto white balance.
Yeah, I honestly, I run 5,500 and just let her eat. If I'm outside, I'm 5,500.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
in the mornings and the evenings, maybe it's a little cool. It's a little cold.
Yeah.
But honestly, like I've personally just like, I'll take it being kind of blue, because I think that it's fine. Like it represents the time of day that we're at, like the mornings are cold.
Yeah.
Like you look out, like some mornings are temperature cold, but like when you're walking around in the morning, like you look around, everything has kind of a little bit of a bluish tint to it. And then when the sun pops up and you get that golden hour, then your colors start to even out, but maybe it's a little warm during that golden hour, but I'm okay with that because it like looks nice. That's what it looks like. Everything has this nice golden wash over it. Same thing with, that sunset. It's going to be warm, then it's going to get a little cool. Maybe you'll get some pink tones in there if you're lucky. And then once the sun goes down, you get that blue hour and it looks blue. And honestly, for me, I think that it looks realistic and I'm okay with that like color cast in there. Like you can, I'm sure, dial that 5,500 back and up a little bit if you needed to, but
Sure.
I've never found it to affect my footage so much where I'm like, oh yeah, that was like a bad white balance. So I just, if I'm outside, I shoot 5,500. If I'm inside, then I use that white balance card and get it as close to possible, and shoot it that way, and then make sure that I remember to switch back into 5,500 when I go outside again.
Yeah, and on a camera with decent dynamic range, if you need to fix it a little bit, you can certainly fix that.
Yep. So next, we're going to talk about exposure, because exposure is just important to your colors and your final image as white balance is.
Sure is.
And you want to make sure that you're getting good exposure. Obviously, if your image is too dark, it looks bad. If it's too bright, it looks bad. You want to find that Goldilocks zone. And obviously, in some situations, that Goldilocks zone is easier to find than other situations. Generally speaking, especially if you're shooting in a Rec 709, if it looks good on the camera screen, it's probably all right. Like if the sky doesn't look blown out and your shadows don't look all black and you can see all the details that you want to and it looks normal, you're probably good to go. That being said, like if you're shooting log, you can't necessarily use that unless you're using a monitor LUT. But that's a topic for another day. Most cameras do also have some sort of exposure aid that I would suggest becoming familiar with and understanding, because there is margin for error in what you're seeing on the camera screen. There's a lot of factors that play into that. If your camera screen is, like I've run into this, you'll have your camera screen cranked up to as bright as it'll go. And you'll be filming something way, way, way in the dark. And you're looking at it, you're like, oh yeah, that's good. It looks great. Like I've got a lot of light. And then you bring it back into post and you look at it, you're like, that is not as bright as it looked on my camera screen. Well, it's because it's been quote unquote artificially lit from behind because of the screen. Like you were seeing it with additional brightness because your LCD screen was bright. And so the actual footage is not that bright. So you're like, you know, you were telling your hunter, oh yeah, we got plenty of light. Like I could see this deer plain as day. And then you get it back and you're like, oh, that's really dark, very grainy.
We've all been there.
Yeah. And like, you know, sometimes, you know, if it's a deer, it's like, well, maybe you're just going to have to live with that. But
Yeah.
your eyes will lie to you. The LCD will lie to you. Just running and gunning, you'll be like, if it looks good, it's probably good, but it may not be technically perfect. And if you get familiar with a couple of different exposure aids, those will give you a more technical look at the image so that you can confirm that, yes, it is good. I'm not blowing out my highlights. I'm not crushing my shadows. My skin tones are where they're supposed to be, all that manner of stuff. The 4 exposure aids that I see most often are going to be waveforms, histograms, zebras, and false color. Waveforms and zebras are what we use most often. A waveform is essentially a graph that represents your exposure values on the y-axis and maps them to the x-axis, which is like what's in your frame. So like if you're looking at your screen and you're looking at it from left to right, that's going to be your x-axis on your waveform monitor. And then your y-axis, or up and down, is going to be the brightness of whatever that left to right part of your frame has in it. It's hard to explain that. Like, just go look up what a waveform looks like and you'll see. And you can, like, if you turn it on and point it at things, like, you'll start to be able to recognize, you know, like I'm pointing this at Joe's face.
Faces, bodies.
Like, I can see the face and the exposure values in that waveform. And waveforms are a really, really great tool because you can set an upper and higher limit, 0 to 100, 0 to 105, whatever. And you'll be able to see where in that full dynamic range your image is falling and what parts of your image are falling where. And so if you've got this waveform on and you see that all the waveforms are piled up way at the bottom, then you know that you're probably underexposed. If you see they're all pushed way up to the top, you're probably too bright. If they're spread evenly throughout and you don't have any that are going below the bottom line or above the top line, then you know that you're not clipping any highlights, you're not crushing any shadows, and you're like inside the exposure range. On the FX6, you can even add a skin tone line so that you know skin tones are supposed to be exposed to kind of a certain percentage. I'm not going to get into that exactly here. If you want to know about that, then look that up, like Google it, and it'll show you. But then you can know, hey, I can see that this guy's face is here in the waveform, like he's on the left side of the screen. I can see his face on the left side of the waveform, and I can see like his skin tone is hitting that percentage line that I set. And so that's a really great tool. I run it all the time. I have it on my monitor. I will say that my monitor,
I do too.
Yeah, my monitor probably has the most. I don't know about yours, Joe. I don't think I've ever run your camera before because when you're on a shoot, you bring your camera, and like I've never had to run your camera, but like I've had to run Clay and Caleb's. And
keep your mitts off my camera, dude.
Out of the 3 of our cameras, I certainly have the most information on mine. And like I had to talk Clay into using the waveforms because just how important it is. They're kind of annoying sometimes, like they get in the way of your image. There's parts of the image that are like behind the waveform monitors, but I think that it's so important to make sure that your exposure is correct, that I like to have it there all the time. and I've really become accustomed to having it, so much so that if I have a camera that does not have the waveforms on, I'm like, I think I'm exposed, but I can't check. Like if I'm filming, I'm looking at the image and I'm looking down at like that waveform monitor in my camera
Mm-hmm.
and going, okay, is the sky, I know the sky's up there. Can I see that skyline underneath my maximum exposure value, like that max line, that 100, that 105? Because if not, then I need to bring it down. Or is my skyline like way down at the bottom and I have room to bring it up? Like maybe I'm looking at a clip and it like looks a little dark and I know the sky's in there. I don't want to blow out the sky. And I'll be like, okay, well, how far can I push this up to get my shadows higher before blowing out the sky? And then I can dial it in and watch that line move up the waveform. And then I'll know, okay, boom, I got to stop there. So if your camera has that capability, I would definitely recommend getting familiar with it. It takes a little bit of running it to kind of figure out exactly what you're looking at and how to read it, but it's not super difficult. And the waveform, especially on the FX6, I don't know if it's the same on a lot of other cameras, but the waveform corresponds directly to the zebras. So zebras are, if you've ever looked at a camera and they've got those little like gray and white zebra lines basically in the frame, those are indicators of a certain exposure percentage. And you can set those to be different things. A lot of times those are going to be at like your 100%. Like I think most cameras ship with the zebras being 100%. So if those zebras show up, then you know that those areas are as bright as they can be. And if you push them any further, they're going to get blown out. So on the FX6, I have zebras set for that and then a skin tone line. And so I honestly don't run with zebras on at all times. I'll turn them on and off. I use
I don't anymore.
Yeah, I use the waveform more often than not.
Yeah, for sure.
But zebras are a great exposure tool for that. You can set the level to be whatever it is. Like if you're really concerned about blowing out your footage, then you can set those waveforms to sit right beneath that 100%. So if I push this image and I start to see those waveforms and I like back up, like I back out until those waveforms disappear, then I'm preserving highlights. Or you can have them on the skin tones so that hey, my skin tones are in the right exposure zone. And for a lot of cameras that don't have a waveform that you can put on your monitor, your zebras are probably going to be your best friend for exposing correctly.
Yeah, they have, I know like Sony specifically, prior to me getting any knowledge about zebras and waveforms and all that, I would use the exposure meter. Like a Sony mirrorless is going to have a meter at the bottom in video mode, and it's going to read a number value. Okay, it's going to read like +1, +2, +1.5, or -5, -0.5. You can use that meter to get your exposure close. So your middle number is going to be 0.0. But then obviously if it goes to, I don't know why it just gave me a plus sign. You sure? Do you see that?
I saw a thumbs up too. Some fancy little FaceTime tool.
Crazy. Wait, did that with Dudley the other day, and he was like, it was like popped up like a thing. But anyways, sorry if you guys can't see that on the audio version, but it like I put my thumbs up, for like pointing up, and it gave me like thumbs up,
like a little bubble.
Thing. That was strange. Yeah. But yeah, you can use that. You can use that meter if like you're just kind of getting going. That meter on a mirrorless Sony works pretty well. I did that for probably a year before I really understood. Like the FX6, like a cinema camera, does not give you that meter. Well, I think you can actually put that meter, but it's not the most accurate indication of exposure.
Yeah.
Using waveforms and zebras is way more accurate. But if you kind of want to get a baseline of exposure and you want something to go off, you can take that mirrorless camera, have it just in the meter mode. And I think it's like a default mode anyway. Even like the FX3 has a meter too. And then you can go shoot things at like 1.0 or plus 2.0 and then put in your editing software and see what it does. And then you can gain a knowledge of how far can I push this camera just monitoring exposure off that meter. And you can honestly get a pretty good image that way. Technically, is it the 100% accurate way? No, it's not. But what you can do is add zebras to that and then use your exposure meter, and it will, it'll tell you when you're overexposed, or it'll tell you when your highlights are clipping. And essentially, I think that's basically indicating if you're like +1, you're one stop over, where you should be. And then obviously 0 is even. -1 is you're a stop below where you should be. But again, that's something you got to go out and play with and see what your camera is capable of, and what color profile you're shooting. And there's a lot of different things that go into it. But if you go out and take your mirrorless and you get it to, or try your best to get it to 0.0, which is even, you can get really, really close with that. And it usually comes out pretty good.
Yeah, I think with those cameras too, how it determines your exposure, there's a couple different modes, right? Like there's your whole frame average, center weighted average, point metering, and all that kind of stuff. So that also comes into play. But again, something that you can look up and try to understand. The moral of the story is you want to make sure that you're getting as even of an exposure as possible, that you're not clipping your highlights, that you are not crushing your shadows, that you've still got detail in your highlights, detail in your shadows, your skin tones are as close to where they should be as possible. And that way you've got a solid image coming into post-production. All this stuff that we just talked about for an hour and a half now is to make sure that you're coming into post-production with the most solid sound and image as possible, because the better it is out of the camera, the less work it is to make it sound good and look good in post-production. If it is overexposed, if it's underexposed, if it's got a color cast, if your sound is clipping, if it's too loud, if it's too soft, all of those are problems that you can solve to some extent, but it takes more work. If everything is shot correctly and the sound is recorded correctly, then it's a lot less work to get it to a good place. So you want to enter into post-production with as solid of a base as possible, which is why we just spent an hour and a half on that, because just like anything else, just like if you're editing, you only have to work with what you bring back with you. If you don't get the shots, well, you don't have the shots. You can't work with them. If all of your stuff is underexposed, then it's probably going to look dark. If your sound is jank the entire time, well, your sound's probably going to sound jank. Like, you got to get it as good as possible in the field, because once you come back into post-production, there's nothing that you can really change about it to a giant degree without some sort of time investment or difficulty associated with that. Obviously, you can.
And sometimes,
go ahead.
Well, sometimes you've got to make a choice in the field too. Say you're out in some bright light, and it's like in the morning, you got the sun coming up, you got your subject, he's glassing on the side of a hill or a mountain. Obviously that he's going to be a little bit dark, but you also can't blow out your highlights. So sometimes you have to make an on-the-fly decision and a choice of, what you want your exposure to be. And that's why kind of doing this stuff in the field on the fly is much different than in a studio. You got to make a choice of what you want to do. And sometimes you got to find a happy medium, and it's not always perfect, but nothing that we're doing out there is controllable. It's pretty much all running and gunning and doing the best you can on the fly.
Yep. So that being said, you've shot your footage, you've recorded your sound. Now we're going to bring it into post-production. We're going to assume that you've edited your entire video, because we're not talking about editing necessarily today. We're talking about color and sound. And mixing, sound, and color correcting and color grading. So just to keep consistent, we're going to go over sound first. One thing that I like to do is I like to keep all of my audio tracks kind of grouped together and separated. And if you've seen any of my timelines, you'll see that kind of organization in my actual timeline. And I do it to some extent when I'm making my first cut, but definitely when I get into sound, I will go through and I'll organize my soundtracks. Sometimes when I'm editing, I'm not necessarily doing all this organization. I'm just kind of throwing stuff in there. And then when I get to the point where the scene is good, then I'll go and organize it, or I'll just leave it until I get to the point in the process where I'm going to start mixing sound. And when I start mixing sound, what I like to do is make these little groups of tracks in my timeline for each type of audio. So the first 3 tracks or 4 tracks, depending, is going to be like natural sound from the camera. And that's going to be anything that's not a person talking that came from my shotgun mic, more or less. There's exceptions to that rule, but that's basically your natural ambient sound. So anything off the shotgun mic is going in there. Underneath that, I have my dialogue tracks. And most of the time, these are going to be lav mic tracks. And I even like to further separate them by person and by situation, because in my audio workflow, I do a lot of track-based editing because I find it to be a little bit easier and faster. And in order for that to work, all the clips in the track have to have some of the same characteristics. So I'll have a group of dialogue tracks, and if I've got, let's say Chris, for example, from Boot Leather, if I've got his lav mic, I'm going to put all of his lav mic dialogue on one track. Then say I've got another talent mic'd up, I'm going to put all their lav mic dialogue on another track. And then say I've got some lav mic stuff of him in a truck, I might put that, like Chris's lav mic from the truck scenes, in an entirely different track, because the characteristics of that sound is going to be different than the lav mic that we had out in the field where he wasn't driving a truck. Sometimes it's really easy. Sometimes there's a lot of tracks in there because there's a lot of different sound environments. But that's how I like to do it. And then after I have those dialogues, then I will have like a big block that I have dedicated to sound effects. So that's all the stuff that I didn't necessarily record on location. That's going to be random sound effects that I'm bringing in from royalty-free sound sites, you know, like whooshes and impacts and bass drops and, you know, cars driving, random stuff. Basically stuff I didn't record that I'm using in my sound design. Underneath that, I'll have a couple of tracks dedicated to ambient audio. And so that's where I would put those sound beds if I needed them. You know, that morning forest ambient sound that I got, you know, on the royalty-free site, or I pulled from somewhere in the project, or I pulled from my library of sound stuff that I had recorded previously. And the reason I like to do that is because a lot of times with those sounds, like, you're going to want to have 30 seconds to maybe 3 minutes of those sounds lined back to back to back to back. So a solid line of sound. And so having those in its own track makes it really easy to do that. I don't have to like find a place for it to go. Like, it just all goes there and it's just a straight bed of sound. And then sometimes, depending on the environment that I'm building, there might be layers to that sound. Like, you might have some forest birds, and then you might have some wind through the pines, and then maybe there was like, you're like, oh yeah, there was a river that was in here. And so I need to find like the sound of kind of a river and put it in there just so you can kind of barely hear it. And so you might have 3 ambient tracks building this like environmental sound. And so I'll have all those in one. And then after those grouping of tracks, I'll have all of my music. And inside of each of those groups, I'm giving myself room to kind of checkerboard that audio. which is something that we'll touch on. But like, even if I just have one talent and he's just using a lav mic and it's one environment, I might still have two dialogue tracks in case I need to overlap two different audio clips and crossfade them, so you don't get that clicking and popping. So I would say that's probably kind of my first step when I start sound editing. What about you, Joe?
I don't think mine is as in depth as that. I think I need to get there for sure. But I definitely do some color coding. I mean, it's a long. I try to keep like you said. I try to keep sound effects on, one channel or one track, and then like you said, I want to keep music on one track, and then I want to keep dialogue audio on one track as well. For me personally, because I think, once you get to a certain level, if you do not stay organized with that stuff, it turns into a very convoluted mess. And then it gets even worse when you send a project off to a client and you're going through the first round of changes, because there's pretty much always changes. And then you have to go back maybe 2-3 weeks later and make those changes. It's much easier to make those changes if you're organized on the front end than it would be on the back end.
Yeah, I found that having my tracks separated like that helps a lot in the changes process, because
Yeah.
like, you don't necessarily have to do it. Like, you could have 4 tracks that have everything, but they're all smashed together like a bunch of bricks, right? And
Mhm.
when you then need to go move a clip and you bring a new one in, then you've got to like move all of these bricks around, put the new clip, and then reassemble all of the bricks.
Mhm.
Where if I've got them all kind of laid out vertically, there's a lot of space between some of those clips. And so if I got to like cut this section and move it over, well, I've cut this, I cut the dialogue track, and then boom, I've got this empty space, and I just slide everything over or slide everything out,
Yeah.
or whatever. And it makes it very easy. I also like to see my dialogue tracks. I've always colored those like the pink rose color in Premiere, simply so I know those are audio tracks, because when I go through and start doing my mixing, I like to be able to see like, hey, okay, here's a big section where he's talking, so I know that I need to duck that music there.
Mhm.
So once you kind of organize your tracks a little bit with sound, the next thing that you want to keep in mind is crossfading and checkerboarding. Checkerboarding is essentially a term that describes the look of a bunch of audio tracks and how they might look like a checkerboard, because you're kind of L cutting and J cutting and overlapping them in your tracks. And the reason that you would do this is so that you can have a nice, constant, even fade from one track to another track. You don't ever want to, under most circumstances, obviously in video you can't say don't ever do this, because there is reasons to do it, but most of the time you want to have sound of some kind. And I even go so far as to say, even if you've got music playing, you want to have natural sound. Most of the time, even if I've got a montage and I've got a track going, you can still hear the natural sound of whatever environment, whatever is going on. If somebody's driving, you can hear the driving. If there's birds, you can hear the birds. If somebody's walking, you can hear the walking. There's a lot of times where maybe you might not do that, but as a general rule, I like to make sure that I've always got natural sound going. And you don't ever want to just start and end a clip just straight, right? You almost always want to use it like a crossfade or a constant dissolve or an exponential dissolve into and out of that clip, so that you're not just going from no sound to all of a sudden there's sound. Because one, that's jarring, and two, sometimes it'll produce like a pop, like a audio pop that you'll see in your levels monitoring. And even from clip to clip, if you've got them butted up against each other, a lot of times you still want to crossfade between those clips just to kind of mesh them together, right? You're kind of gluing them together with that fade. And what that does is really just hides that you've made an audio cut there. And that checkerboarding helps a lot with that because it allows you to have a lot of control over when you start fading one clip and when you start fading the incoming clip. And it also allows you to kind of, put different types of audio on top of each other and seamlessly have it all transition in and out. As a general rule, you don't want to, like, if you're looking at your edit, you don't really want to see a straight cut all the way down from your video to your audio. Like, you don't want to see video cut, audio cut, audio cut all in line with your playhead. You want to kind of shift those around so it kind of has a little zigzag in it, because nothing draws more attention to a cut than having that sound stop or start right on that cut. Now, that's an editing strategy you can use, but generally, if you're trying to maintain this illusion of immersion for your viewer, you want them to not know that you're switching audio tracks or that you're cutting between different sounds or starting a new clip, like cutting a clip, right? Even if the clips are in the same environment, right? Maybe you're showing this scene and you're not cutting away from that scene, you're not cutting out of that scene, you're just cutting to a different angle of that scene. Well, you don't want the sound to be cut on that video cut, because then it draws attention to it and makes the viewer think, oh, well, I noticed they just cut the camera, and it's going to kind of take them out of that experience. If you keep that sound constant underneath that cut, they're going to see a visual cut, but they're not going to hear a audio cut, and so it's going to be much smoother for them to experience. And so, that's where checkerboarding your audio, like I said, and cross-fading between clips is really, really helpful. And then having that bed of sound that you are using your ambience for is super, super helpful. Those crossfades, that checkerboarding, and that ambient sound really glues everything together. And instead of having a bunch of audio elements all spread out all over the place, you've kind of like baked them all together into just this audio environment. And so it sounds like everything is just happening at that time and is fully immersive. And that's generally the strategy that I like to approach my audio with. Obviously, there's times where you want to have some of those jarring cuts or bring attention to a cut, but for the most part, 80 to 90% of the time, you want to create a really solid audio environment that feels very meshed together, feels very glued together, and doesn't necessarily call attention to itself. Like, it should feel natural. And you don't want any of those like sudden jumps in volume when you change clips. You don't want pops from different clips coming in, or different or starting or stopping or whatever it is. And you don't want it to just suddenly be like no audio, and then suddenly there's audio and stuff like that. Like, you always want to make sure that when you're editing that audio, you're thinking like, okay, is this smooth? Does it sound realistic? Have I created this like environment where all of my video can kind of just sit on top of and exist and sound natural? And that's where a lot of that kind of checkerboarding and crossfading and stuff comes in for me.
Yeah, and I mean that stuff's all going to come with time too. Obviously timelines you're doing as opposed to someone being a beginner is obviously not going to look the same, but you can start
Right.
to employ those same tactics. Even if you don't have multiple levels of audio, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is, you could still start doing that. As simple as like a J cut or L cut. Starting audio under the clip, the previous clip to kind of bring you into another scene. Anyone could start doing that pretty much as soon as they start editing. And it's a good habit to get into.
Mm-hmm. So then, once you've decided what audio clips and stuff, and you've checkerboarded and you've crossfaded and doing all that stuff, and a lot of this stuff is kind of happening at the same time. I'm talking about it like there's steps to it, but a lot of this is happening simultaneously. Like when I'm sound designing, when I'm editing, I'm paying attention to all these things, and I may be changing stuff all together at the same time. So don't listen to this and go, okay, I checkerboard, and then I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this. Like, these are all things to keep in mind as you work through your video, doing your sound design. And I personally, I do my sound design after I've edited, the story, right? I do the story, I do the sound design in as much as, I need it to make sure that the story is working, but I'm not dialing in all of my sound. I will do a light kind of sound mixing before I send it to a client, because if your sound is just terrible, then again, they're going to look at it and go, this sucked. I hate it. And they don't in their head have that oh, he's going to work on that later. I'm just looking and watching for the story. Right. But as I'm editing the story, I'm kind of doing a little bit of that, making sure I can hear the music, hear the talking, hear all these things, that it doesn't sound completely terrible. And then I like to, once I've got picture lock, that's when I start doing sound. I know that Caleb and Clay don't work that way. They like to do a lot of the sound mixing as they go along. So that's kind of a editor to editor basis, I don't do it because I just like to be able to focus on the story. I don't like to have to be doing the story and then also leveling all my sound and doing all that stuff. I like to just get the story working, and then I'll get the sound afterwards. But that's just how my brain thinks.
Yeah, that's what I do. I do almost all mine after the fact too. Same with color. If something's if there's some really some jarring audio, and I watch something back and I can't even take myself out of that the color or the sound hasn't been done yet, then I'll adjust it incrementally, just so I can get a better feel for the whole thing as a whole.
Yeah.
But all mine pretty much happens at the end.
Yeah. So as you are doing your sound process, another important thing to consider is that you're keeping the sound levels on your computer or your headphones relatively constant. You want to find a level, you want to find a level that when you hear the sound, that's about how loud you would listen to that, right? So sometimes I'll go to YouTube and I'll go find, I don't do this anymore. I have a more technical process that I use, figuring out exactly how loud to set my speakers and stuff, but I'm not going to go into that because that's a whole thing. Calibrating sound environments is a kind of a new thing that I'm trying to learn about. But generally, if you're watching a video, how many volume clicks you want to listen to it at, and so go find a video, or go find a show or something that has been mixed well, and go play it, and then turn your volume up or down until it's at a comfortable listening volume where you're hearing all the things. It's not hurting your ears. You're not holy crap, it's too loud or it's too quiet. Find where you would want to listen to that. Ranger's running up and down the stairs. Go find that level at which you would like to listen, it's comfortable for you to listen to it at, and then take note of it. And as you're mixing sound, don't touch it, because you want to have that constant reference, so that as you are increasing and decreasing the level of those clips inside of your edit, you're able to hear, okay, now I'm too high. Oh, it's too low. I need to bring it up. I can't hear it. I can't hear the birds chirping. Bring it up. I can't hear the birds chirping. Bring it up. Okay, there it is. It's very quiet. Maybe I just want it barely audible. Maybe I want it to be very audible. And you can dial in those levels. And I think like on it's hard to say because I've got speakers now, but on when my Mac did not have the big speakers, I was doing like 4 clicks down or something like that from max. Like I would go to max and I'd click it 4 like 4 clicks
Yeah,
down or something like that.
that's about what I do. I started like you kind of a rule of thumb for me has been, and I used to kind of make this error. I'd have my speakers too high and then export, and it wasn't enough. So now my process is I keep my speakers almost dead nuts half. I think it's like what you said, like I'm like 4 clicks down, and on the norm, like you said, I'll go watch videos, and I started recognizing that when I watch videos on YouTube or Vimeo, whatever it was, if I have my computer at, like I said, pretty much dead nuts in the middle, that was where I wanted to listen to things. So I kind of started editing in that. You know, obviously there's more technical stuff, but we don't really have to get into that. But rule of thumb is I kept it in the middle, and that's been pretty good for me.
Yeah, I mean,
because it can give you a false sense if you have your speakers all the way up,
mhm.
and then like you edit something and then you don't check it. You know, like obviously you really don't listen to anything with your speakers all the way up on your computer or your AirPods. I mean,
Right.
some might, but we're gonna have some ear issues at that point.
Yeah, maybe sound mixing isn't for you then.
Yeah, right.
You're like, I can't hear anything. Well, maybe
Yeah,
maybe you shouldn't
my
be
wife
doing
tells me.
sound. Um,
Yeah,
so I mean that's a very rough way to do it. Obviously, like
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
at the point right now where I'm like trying to calibrate exactly how loud my speakers are in decibels and LUFS and like loudness specifications so that I can know exactly like, hey, my speakers are, this is how loud they need to be when I'm listening to things. Just kind of the same as we'll talk
You
about
need to
later.
teach me that.
Well, see, the problem is I haven't quite figured it out 100% yet. I'm still kind of like, I've been reading a lot of articles. I've been trying different things. Like, you know, it's one of those learning processes that I'm still
Yeah.
in. So, but like, I say that so that you guys, so that the people who are listening to this who are like, why you always need to, you know, have a technical reference for this, that, and the other. Yes, technically you do. But when you're first starting out, like that's a lot. That's like a lot, dude.
It's way over your
Yeah,
head.
like
Way
I'm
over your
I'm
head.
8 years into this, 9 years into this, and I'm just now being like, maybe there's got to be like a standard out there, you know, like there's got to be
Yeah,
a
right.
professional standard. I should probably find that out, you know, like for 5, 7, 8 years, I was like, yeah, I mean, I set my volume to about this, and like all my stuff sounded fine.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you're
Sounds good.
yeah, like you're not gonna send it to a sound engineer or somebody who mixes for like Hollywood, and they're not gonna say the same thing. But like the general masses on YouTube are like, yeah, it sounds fine.
Right.
So you know, just find
Well,
that
yeah,
level.
and we've gotten kind of that point. I think in media as a whole, like
Yeah,
uh, in a way, we've accepted mediocrity. You know, and I'm not like saying this stuff's not important or I'm like, I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like
yeah,
we've kind of gotten to the point, like on YouTube, it's so like filter down that the vast majority like don't even they don't it doesn't even click in their brain that something technically is not right or whatever. They're just like, oh, I just turn my speaker up, they just
right.
where we know it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like people just get into it. Like I think it's a good habit to get into, is doing it correctly, or
Yeah,
at least giving them the baselines of like, hey, this is how you can get it like really, really close. And then, if there's need for more technical at the end, certainly we have that information too. But
yeah,
to get it good, I think these and usable for most, media outlets.
mm-hmm.
I think this is a good way to go about it.
Yeah. So I mean, having that constant volume in your computer or in your headphones, if you're using headphones, um, is definitely something you want to pay attention to, and it's going to get you pretty close. I'm going to talk about decibel levels in a little bit, but um, overall, like mixed to your ear, right? I'm going to give you decibel levels that I use, but these are all like, you know that little squiggly line that you would use in like math where it's like around this number, you know, it's like approximately that little squiggle. All of these levels have that little squiggle in front of it because you got to mix to your ear. Like, I could tell you, hey, mix to this level, but if it doesn't come through, it's like not working, right? So when you are mixing, you want to be listening to it and going, okay, can I hear my speaker, not my speaker, my subject, his words? Can I hear the dialogue? Is it punching through the music? Is the music too loud? Is it overpowering this? Can I hear the footsteps? Are the footsteps too loud? Does it sound like this dude is like marching 500 pounds a man through the crunchiest brush you've ever heard? Like, is it too loud? Do I need to turn that down? Like, is it harsh? Like, you want to mix to your ears because ultimately your audience is not sitting there with an audio meter being like, oh, I can see that there's an ambient at negative 35 decibels, you know, like if they can't hear it, it doesn't exist. And if it's too loud, then they're going to be like, God, that hurt my ears. Like that whole thing was way too freaking loud, you know? So as you're mixing, as much as I could give you technical specs, those only go so far. You have to listen with your ears and you have to trust your ears and you have to go, okay, can I hear this? Can I not hear this? Do I want to hear this? Okay, if I want to hear it and I can't hear it, I should turn it up. If I don't want to hear it and I can hear it, I should turn it down. You know, like, are these things interfering? All of these things, like, that's all just kind of a by feel basis. The same way as like when we talk about editing, you know, like sometimes it works. And like, I can't necessarily tell you, okay, do this, that, and the other thing, your scene's going to work. You know, like I could give you some guidelines, but you ultimately have to figure that out. And it's the same thing with mixing. Like, you got to mix to your ears. And if you've got like a constant baseline for how loud you're monitoring your audio and it's fairly correct, then if it sounds good, then it's probably going to sound good. That being said, do you mix with headphones or do you mix with speakers, Joe?
I'm like 50-50. If like I really kind of got to like, if I have a lot of noise going on around me, at home, and like these kids are throwing like balls at the wall, or you know, playing magnet tiles or whatever, like I'm definitely got my headphones in. But I would say the majority of time I'm mixing off my speakers. Yeah, I'd say it's probably half and half.
Yeah, I like to mix. I know you can mix with headphones, and I have. I like to mix with the speakers because I feel like it gives me a better representation of how most people are going to be watching the video. Like, most people don't watch videos with headphones on in most places.
No.
Like, you know, I mean, I know there's people who go to the airport and watch videos, and, you know, maybe they're watching videos like, I don't know. Like, I try to think of how do I watch videos? And like, most of the time, unless I'm like in the truck on a road trip or in an airport, like I'm like not watching videos with my headphones on. Like, if I'm in public, I'm probably not watching videos, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not.
Well, some people are, but
some people definitely do. But like, most of the time, if I'm watching a video, like I'm sitting at my desk, I'm sitting on my couch, I'm sitting in bed, like, and I'm just watching it on my phone. And the sound, there's a difference in the sound that comes out when it's just like your phone versus when it's just the speakers, you know, or like, you know, if somebody's watching a TV show, it's on the TV and they're not got headphones for the TV unless they're, you remember those?
Dude, I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
I tried to buy it for my mom like 15 years ago.
Yeah, it was like some little headphones.
It's all the infomercial.
Yeah, it was like Bluetooth.
Like, Mom, you need those.
It was like those little Bluetooth. It was Bluetooth before Bluetooth was a thing. And it was like headphones for your TV. So like, you know, when you're old and can't hear, like, you can have your special headphones that turn up to 5 million decibels. Or like, you wanted to sit in bed and watch TV next to your wife, and she's like tired of hearing your World War II documentaries at 2 a.m. And so you got your little privacy. She's like, I'm tired of hearing you play Braveheart. at 2 in the morning.
Yeah, which is true because I've been watching my like go to sleep TV show the last week and a half or so has been the Pacific, and my wife's like, "You're not watching that," like because it's World War II film and it's got guns going off, and
I mean,
but I think I need those.
so,
You know,
Joe needs the chaos of battle to really get to sleep.
yeah, right, yeah.
He's
But
like
I
my
did almost
ideal
buy those
sound,
for my
my
mom.
ideal soundscape. You know, my ideal soundscape is Normandy, the beaches of
Yeah,
Normandy.
right. Yeah, M1A is just going on in the background.
Hey, my ideal soundscape would just be a fighter jet ripping the sky apart. I get it. Although I couldn't sleep to that because I would want to. I'd be like,
As you're streaming tears as you go to sleep.
hey, that's only in Top Gun. It was very emotional.
Yeah, right.
All right, so
Oh boy.
mix to your ear, but I'm going to give you some levels that I generally mix to. And these have been like I did Google research to find these and have been using them for years. Overall, oh, by the way, now that we're talking about levels, I'm going to be referencing the audio meter in your editing program. You've probably seen it.
Yes.
It has audio levels on there. I'm not going to get into it. There's surprising, I know. There's a lot of technicality that goes behind audio. There's like 50 different names for it. There's different standards of measurement, all this, that, and the other thing. All you need to know is that on that audio meter, you're going to see 0 at the top, and then it's going to descend in negative numbers going downwards. And it extends exponentially down. So you're going to see more of a gap between like 0 and -1 decibels than there's going to be between like -20 and -25 decibels because it's a sound is exponential. It all adds on to each other, which is why if you stack 2 clips on top of each other, that sound increases. Your sound is going to be louder because they add
That's
together.
a good trick.
It is. You can use that.
It is if you shoot your audio too low, but that's another day.
So generally, when you're looking at that, 0 is max. You do not want it to exceed 0. In fact, you really don't want it to exceed like -3. If it exceeds 0, you're clipping. That's your peaking level, and you'll see it. It'll like start being red, and that's how you know you're losing audio information, and it's way too freaking loud. So you do not ever want any part of your mix to go over that. Generally, like most of the time, you're not going to get things like that except for somebody you didn't record your audio properly and somebody is talking way too loud, or like gunshots will do it. Explosions, truck stuff, things like that. I mean, a gunshot is something that will definitely hit 0, and you got to like bring that down. But yeah, you don't want anything above 0. Overall, sorry guys.
Easy, big fella.
Yeah. Overall, you want your audio levels like hitting around -10 decibels on that meter, somewhere in that range. I have mixed to like -6 before, but I find it's a little loud. So I like to -10 is kind of overall, if everything's hitting around -10, like overall as a mix, then you're usually pretty good to go. And that's giving you plenty of space on the, on the gap between -10 and -1, that you've got room to breathe there. Dialogue, I usually like to have around -12 to -15 decibels, just kind of depending. Like if somebody's talking in a regular voice, -12 is perfectly fine. If you've got like the tree stand whisper, pumping it up to -12 might be a little loud. Honestly, sometimes like -15, it's like, I know this dude's whispering and it's just too many like whispery tones at too high of a volume. But generally that -12 to -15 range is kind of where you want your dialogue to fall. Music, anywhere from like -15 to -20, -25, really depending. Music is one of those things that's very heavily dependent upon the song and what's happening in the video. Like you could have a montage where the music is really driving that montage, and so you want that music to be loud and up front. So that's where you're going to have it up near that like -12 level, or -15 level or whatever. Then if like you have somebody talking and there's still audio, then you might have to drop that down to a -20, a -25, a -30, just depending. And it's one of those things where there's a lot of variations between, like, one song you might be able to hear somebody talking over it fine at -18 because it's soft and it doesn't interfere with their voice. Another song you might have to lower it way more because it's just punching way up, and you can't hear the person because of the complexity of the song or the notes that the song has, or the instruments just aren't meshing with the voice. So then you might have to lower it. But generally, starting out like that -18 to -25 range, you're going to be in a good ballpark. And then sound effects is very various. There's like levels that they give for that, and I don't listen to them because it just really depends on what I need them for. You know, like if it's if it's an ambient audio, well then I want it to be loud enough that it feels natural, but not so loud that it's like, holy crap, that bird has crawled into my eardrum. You know what I mean? If it's a gunshot, then I want it to be loud, but I don't want it to be like just out of the blue, like somebody just fired a gun right next to your ear. If it's whooshes and bass drops and stuff like that, then it's kind of like I'm floating that audio level around until it feels right. Like it doesn't sound too loud and it doesn't sound too soft, you know? Because like if you've just got a whoosh and it just, I mean, that's not a sound that happens usually in nature. I mean, it kind of does, like birds and cars flying, passing you and stuff like that. But generally, like a whoosh is not, a bass drop is not happening in nature, isn't happening in regular
Right.
life unless you're going to like a lot of EDM concerts. Like that being too loud is like really distracting. Like I just want it to be there to kind of add a little something. Like sometimes when you're doing sound design, like you may not like you're just barely able to hear that thing, and in the overall mix it just like adds something, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell that it was there. And that's where some of that like mixing to your ear comes in. Like I give you these levels, and that's great as a starting point, but then you got to go, okay, am I hearing like the dialogue over the soundtrack? And if not, like that soundtrack might be at -25, but if you're still not hearing the dialogue, well, you might have to drop that soundtrack back, you know? Maybe it's all just, can I hear what I want to hear, and does it sound natural, and are the vocals clear? Does it sound good? Like you start with that baseline and then kind of dial it in from there.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm with. Yeah, my one pod died. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
All right.
You explained it perfectly.
Sweet. So then the last thing I'm going to talk about with audio, and this is a little bit more advanced, but it's I'll mention it. There's a lot of effects that you can do with audio, and I'm not talking like making somebody's voice sound like a robot, which you can do. I haven't yet found a good practical use for that in our industry, but at some point maybe I will. But like I'm talking about EQ or equalization, equalizers, compression, noise reduction, and limiters. These are all really, really good tools, and I use them a lot. It takes some figuring out how to use them, but I'll give you like a quick run through so that you know kind of what each of them does generally. EQ is like color correction for sound. It's what allows you to color that sound. If you think of sound like a bunch of frequencies combined together, which is what scientifically it is, you can liken that to a bunch of colors, each of those frequencies being a certain color in an image. And EQ allows you to increase and decrease the loudness of those frequencies, or the loudness of the colors, right? Kind of the brightness of the colors. And so using EQ is a great way to color your sound. You can use it to help fix really harsh sounding things. You can use it to really make somebody's voice sound great. You can use it to get rid of annoying noises. There's a lot of applications for it, but more or less EQ is like color correction for sound. And I use that a lot on dialogue tracks more than anything, just to get people sounding right. Compression is essentially being able to decrease the dynamic range of your sound, whatever clip you put it on. Essentially what it does is you give it a certain threshold and dial in some parameters, and it will, if your audio goes above a certain parameter, it will decrease it by another parameter. And I'm not going to get into what all of those are called, but if you're interested in using compression, just look up how to use audio compressors, and it'll go through all those ratios and thresholds and all that kind of stuff. But essentially what that does is it takes an audio waveform, if you're looking at it, and it's this big, and it'll kind of crush it down so that what it really does is take your highs and decreases them so that they're closer to your lows. And then you've got less range here, and then you can lift the whole thing up. And that's how you get those really nice, even audio levels. And you can also use them for hiding harsh frequencies and stuff like that, but these are a really great tool. Premiere now has noise reduction, which is a really great tool for very noisy environments. You got to use it sparingly, just kind of the same as like warp stabilizer. Like if you use it too much, it just kind of sounds weird. But it does do a good job of kind of helping with a little bit of harshness from noisy environments. They've also got this like, what's it called? The podcast beta thing. And essentially it's a website, and you put your audio into it, and then it like AI fixes it. I will say I've put a bunch of stuff through that, and I've never gotten great results. I think, again, it's one of those things that like works great if it's like a person talking at normal volume in like kind of a normal environment. But like we had that really windy day when we were filming Chris when he killed that mule deer, and there was a couple clips that were really harsh in there, and I put him through that, and it didn't help. But it's a tool, and you never know, it might be able to help. So if you've got some really challenging audio, you might be able to put it through and see if it'll help. And then you've also got limiters. And limiters are essentially like a they do a similar thing to compression, except for you set a level, and you say, hey, anything above that level, shut off, like shut down, so that nothing can pass that level. And so that's great for like if you've got some really loud stuff, or like I set one to be at like -3 on my master track, so that nothing is ever going over -3. You can set them at like -0.1, just to make sure that nothing ever peaks, and so that you're not getting any distortion. And so those can be useful in a variety of applications. They're great for like gunshots and stuff like that. I've used limiters to like tamp down really loud gunshots. And of course there's like 4 million other audio effects, but those are kind of some of the ones that you might get into using at some point, and that I've found to be helpful. And the one thing I have had people ask me about is that parametric equalizer for songs. And I forgot to write it down, so I forgot the actual settings of it. But essentially what it is it's an equalizer that only acts on like one band of frequencies. And there's a bunch of different settings that go into that. But what it does is, so when you've got music and you've got a voice on top of that music, sometimes those frequencies clash. And so you'll feel like you can't hear that person, or they're kind of muddied up in the song. And so a great way to fix that is to actually create this like trough in the song's frequencies for that voice to sit in. And because the human voice occupies a very certain range of frequencies, you can use that and make this trough in a song's frequencies that kind of just dips the frequencies that interfere with the voice down a little bit, so that the voice kind of pops through a little bit more. And I literally have that set as an effect, like a preset in Premiere. I call it like music para EQ. It's the parametric equalizer effect. And like it doesn't necessarily have a setting for that. I had to go and like I saw that on YouTube and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I set it and I use it a lot. And it just kind of, it reduces those frequencies, and you don't necessarily notice it listening to the music, but you can definitely hear the voice pop through it. And that's been a super helpful effect for me.
Yeah, I've never used that. I should, or try it at least.
It's helped me a lot, especially with.
Sorry if the audio changed. I had to take my AirPods out; they died. So I don't know if you can tell or talk about audio.
Talking about audio, and here we are.
I'm just changing it mid clip.
Right, dude. We're going for a Joe Rogan special here. 2.5 hours.
Well, sometimes you got to flesh stuff out, and it's like why rush it? This is sometimes you can't just cut it off.
Yeah,
if you got places to be.
Yeah,
but
I mean it's a lot. Like there's no.
Well, the crazy part is we're like almost surface level with some of it. It's like
we're glossing over a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's where like if someone's super experienced and like they might watch this and be like, oh, they didn't cover X, Y, Z, and it's like, well, we don't have we're not shooting a 24-hour podcast, but there is a class that we offer where you come get all that information.
I was about to say if I was about to say if you listen to 2.5 hours of this and you were intrigued and you're like, man, I could spend 4 days listening to these guys jab.
Whoa. Well, guess what?
Do we have the thing for you?
Look no further. You found him.
Yeah, you'll leave and you'll be like, I never want to sit in the editing room with Ryer ever again. Well, Joe,
yeah. Which hey, we do have a class coming up.
We do.
We're not releasing those dates until we hammer them down.
Yeah, the only person outstanding right now is Ellsworth.
Well, Jason, you're just gonna have to figure it out, buddy.
Yeah, he's had a whole day. 24
I'll bring
hours.
my Blackstone down and I'll whip it up, dude. I mean,
Joe's
not gonna be great, but I'll whip it up.
Joe's gonna be cooking spaghetti every meal. Spaghetti.
Yeah, well, yeah, dude, you guys aren't ready for all that, man.
Yeah, well, I keep hearing.
I
keep hearing about this great Italian spaghetti, and I ain't never had any yet.
Well, because here's the problem, and this is totally off base, but the problem is everyone outside of anyone who grew up Italian, they're so accustomed to like this. God, I want to cuss so bad, but this pasta that's not very good, right? And so when I hit them with the real stuff, like the actual legit stuff, they're like, I don't know if I like that. And it's like, I just can't, I can't tell them that what they've been eating is trash. It's like this is what it really is. So it's like I'm hesitant. Like my wife, she's like, I don't really like this stuff. It's like, well, because you've been eating ragu your whole life, and like you're skewed at what the actual reality is here.
Sad.
So I'm a little hesitant.
Well, here's the
but
thing.
I am gonna bring you some. I'm gonna bring you
like
some.
I'll probably like it. It's Clay and Caleb you're gonna have to worry about, because Clay and Caleb are the ones who have. They would tell you they have the very refined palates, but
they have.
I would say that they're the least refined palates.
Yeah, I can't take anything Caleb like on that like food. I'm like, Caleb, we're just not gonna. We're not gonna agree here. And honestly, if we're being honest, there's one that's wrong and there's one that's right, and he's not right. And I think that's fair.
I've given up that fight a long time ago. I gave up that fight.
Yeah.
With both him and Clay. And I just
yeah.
And I let them pick the restaurants, because if if I pick the restaurants, then we're gonna go somewhere, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, there's no chicken nuggets here." I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm just not gonna eat. I'm like, dude, I thought you wanted to find a
Yeah.
good
And
restaurant
then the
because like
thing
we're in
is-
this city we never go to, in the city like, hey,
Right.
they're known for this one thing, and like, you know, maybe we go to a restaurant, you know, it's like a not a high end restaurant, but it's like a upper tier restaurant. And it's like, oh, they
Right.
don't have chicken nuggets. Like, well, yeah, we don't. If we wanted chicken nuggets, we could have went and got some Dino Nuggets from the store, dude, and ate them there.
Yeah.
Like, we gotta
And then
pop
they
those
go
in at the
order it.
Airbnb.
Right. They go order it, and then they're paying like $19 for chicken strips, and it's like, well, why did we even come here? Like, we could have
Yeah.
we could have just slid into McDonald's for $4 and
Right.
got you chicken nugget. You know,
Yeah.
that's the issue. And
Anyways.
Caleb will always be like, "Oh, pick the place or whatever." I'm like, "Well, no, because like you're not gonna like anything there, and I'll eat whatever as long as the napkins."
Right.
And you know, that's where we end up.
Yeah, because this is what happens is they're like, hey, Ryer, pick a place, and you know, like I like to try new stuff,
Worldly.
so I'll be like,
Right.
let's go find a place, like, and if it's, you know, if I try something and it's not the best, I'll be like, okay, whatever. Now I know I don't
Yeah.
like octopus legs or whatever, but you never know. Maybe I really
Yeah.
like octopus legs, so I want to try the octopus legs. And if I pick a place and we
Right.
go there and it's like they don't have a grilled cheese, you know, then like I picked the worst place ever. Like, yeah, let
Yeah,
Ryer
and then
decide. He's gonna pick. He picks the most expensive place that doesn't have any good stuff. Should have just went to Chick-fil-A. And it's like, okay, I'm not.
Right.
I'm not gonna take that abuse. Like,
It's
y'all
not
pick.
even worth it.
Y'all pick the place. Y'all pick the place, and like I'll find.
And like
something there.
it doesn't just end there. It's like carried out through the night, and then
Yeah,
Caleb will be like, "We should have just got pizza or whatever." Which, you know, I'm down for pizza. You know.
Yeah.
Anyways,
I hope they listen to this. In case
what
you
else we
guys,
got?
in case you guys are thinking like, you know, this is just me and Joe dishing. Like, I would say this exactly to all their faces. So
I would.
I
would
have.
too.
I've been like, you
I
guys get
agree.
to pick. So we're dishing,
Like
but
Caleb
also
will. Yeah, Caleb will try to give me diet advice, and I'll be like, "Dude, we're just not gonna have this conversation, okay?" It's not happening. I'll take your advice on a lot of things. This just is not one of them.
all right. Last but not least, we've got color,
Okay.
which honestly, like, there's not
Fair enough.
there's not as much to talk about with color because it's one of those things where it's like,
No,
does it
there's
look
not.
good? Then it's probably good. You
It's
know?
subjective.
It's
It's
very.
subjective too, right? Like you have, you know, a lot of films you'll see, movies, big productions have a certain feel that they want it to, and then you know most of our stuff is pretty down the middle, you know. And some stuff looks good to other people, and some it doesn't. Just like
Yeah.
some people like rap music, and some like rock or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So color, I mean, it's one of those things, like we said. I mean, it's very, if it looks good to you, then it's probably good. Now there are standards, there are technical specs, there are all of these things, but you know, if you're just getting into this, if it looks good, then it, you know, I hate saying that because sometimes, like, honestly, like, and I'll say this about myself, is when you're first starting out, you're like, oh yeah, that looks good, and then you'll send it and like it doesn't look good. So it's hard to be like, if it looks good, like it's good. Same thing with sound. Like, if you know, it's hard to say if it sounds good, then it's probably good. But like, until you've kind of got that muscle memory, like, you know, and it's just, you're going to get better over time. Like, over time, you develop that instinct where you'll know if it looks good, you'll know if it looks bad or whatnot. But, you know,
Or you look back on something like 2 years later, and you're like, "Good God, what was I thinking?"
right. Yeah. Sometimes
You
that,
know?
sometimes that happens the next morning. You'd be editing at like 12 o'clock at
Yeah.
night, and you're like, man, this is looking good. This sounds good, dude. This scene
Yeah.
nailed it. And then you come back the next day and you rewatch, and you're like, what was I thinking? That looks like trash. The entire edit is jank. It sounds like complete garbage, and the colors are all over the
Right.
place. You're like, scrap it.
Right.
Remove attributes, Lumetri color, start over.
Right.
But generally, like your color correcting and grading to feel like
Yeah.
that's really all there is to it. We're gonna go over a couple things, but like a lot of it, especially color, is very like, what are you going for? Like, do you like something that's really contrasty with a lot of color, or do you like something that looks kind of washed out without a lot of color? Do you like blues? Do you like oranges? Do you like, you know, there's 4 million attributes. That's why every single movie you go to looks different, you know? And there's reasons why some movies look certain ways, and you can color grade and make it look a certain way for emotional impact or whatever. And those are all creative decisions. And color is one of the most apparent creative decisions, which is why people talk about it so much, because it is one of the most apparent and easiest things to talk about. You go to, you know, watch Mad Max Fury Road, and the whole thing is red and orange. You know, like obviously they made that decision. People loved it. It looked really good. And then you go watch something else and, you know, it's really blue, or you'll go watch something and it's black and white, you know, like all those are creative decisions. So you kind of got to color grade, to what looks good to you, you know? And I will say before we get started, I want to talk about the difference in color correction and color grading, because people use those terms interchangeably when they're not. Color correction is balancing your footage and getting it to be technically correct, where you're removing color casts, you're making sure that the colors are within the ranges that they're supposed to be in, your contrast and your exposure is correct and in the ranges it's supposed to be. Like, you're balancing your footage. Color correction is a technical process. You're not really going and making it look pretty yet. Like, you're making sure that the clips are technically correct. Color grading is that making it look pretty process. That's where you're giving it that creative flair. And if you've done a good job color correcting, that color grading comes a lot easier. But they're not one and the same. A lot of times we're doing them at the same time at this level because, like, I'm not going to make Mad Max. Like, I'm not coloring Mad Max. Like, I'm making a video for YouTube. And I'm kind of, in my mind, I know what I want it to look like. But if you get up into the higher levels, like, that color correction happens before the color grade. And that color grade is the creative part of the color process. The color correction is the technical part. The color correction is where you're taking that log footage and you're converting it into a Rec 709 space. It's where you're making sure that your whites are white and your blacks are black, and your exposure across the frame is where it's supposed to be, and your white balance and your tint balance is correct. Your skin tones are where they're supposed to be. The red looks red and the green looks green, and they're in like this proper technical specs. And then once you have that baseline, then you can go grade and get that like pretty look. You know, it's kind of like building a house. Like, you got to build the foundation and all the walls and everything first, and then you can decide what you want on the outside and what you want on the inside and where you want to put the furniture and what kind of rock you want and all this. But you got to have that framework first. Color correction is building that framework. Color grading is all of that finishing, like making it look pretty. When you're color correcting or color grading, when you're working on color, it's usually best to have a color calibrated monitor. Like, if you use a Mac, your monitor's pretty good. It's not color graded or color calibrated, but it's pretty good. You can get all the way up into buying very specific monitors for color grading and color correcting. But for the most part, you know, you just want to make sure that you're using the best monitor that you've got. If you're using like a $130 monitor from Walmart, that's going to affect how your colors look. You know, if you're using the $10,000 monitor, like, you're going to be able to view your colors a lot more accurately. And it's kind of the same thing as like what we were talking about with monitoring your audio, is it's important that you have that constant level for your audio. It's important as well to have a good monitor for your video. Obviously, there are barriers to entry, a lot of technical specs, but you want to make sure that your monitor is as good as possible. Past that, get to know your scopes, get to know how to use your scopes. And the scopes that are basically technical data representations of the colors and the luminances that are in your image. And while every single monitor looks different and your monitor can lie, the scopes do not lie. The scopes tell you, because they're looking at the footage, they give you data that you can use to make better color decisions. You can see, is it too bright? Is it too dark? Am I within my exposure values? Is it shifted red? Is it shifted blue? Is it shifted green? Whatever. And there's a bunch of different scopes. You've got waveforms and histograms. You've got the parades. You've got luminance. You've got histograms that show only luminance. You've got histograms that show color. Vector scopes. Like, there's all kinds of scopes, and they all represent different things and show it graphically in different ways. And I'm not going to talk about all of them here. I would say that the ones that I use most are going to be, again, the waveforms, and then those, I just said it. What was it? The vector scopes. The vector scopes. I use the waveforms a lot for exposure, and I use the vector scopes a lot for color. And again, I'm still learning how to do all of this stuff at a more technical level. So I'm still learning myself how to read scopes and what they all mean and what all those numbers mean. But, the waveform is incredibly helpful. I would say it's my number one used scope. And then that vector scope helps just see color casts and stuff like that. But they're incredibly useful tools. There's a lot of resources on the internet showing you how to use those things. So it's worth a Google, it's worth a YouTube to at least get an idea of what they're showing you. And then as you work, you'll see them move and you'll be able to understand a little bit more what they're doing. Just the same way as when you put the waveform on your computer, on your camera, it's going to be like, what is this showing me? I don't know yet. But as you use it, you'll figure it out a little better. And the waveforms on a computer work the same way as the waveforms on the camera. So, you could just rewind to that part of the podcast and it basically works the same way. You've got a maximum value and a minimum value and everything in between. And the X and Y values represent the same stuff. So, not going to get into a whole bunch more detail than that, though, because that's a whole probably 3-hour podcast in and of itself. So,
and it's hard to explain that over. That's hard to teach or explain.
Yeah,
without visual representation of what you're doing. I mean, I think it's borderline impossible.
Yeah, that you gotta see those. I'm gonna have a very hard time.
There's like 40 different ones, and they're all colors, and then you move one. It's too complicated for this.
Yeah. So when you're color correcting, one of the main things is just, again, making sure that your exposures are correct and that your contrast is correct. And again, it's one of those things where you're kind of looking at it and making those decisions. And you might have to prioritize certain things. The way that it works in Premiere is there's the Lumetri color panel, and it's got sliders for a bunch of different controls. It's got more than sliders, but I'm going to talk about the sliders. You've got an exposure slider, you've got a white balance slider, you've got a tint slider, and then you've got highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, vibrance, saturation. And so each of those things is affecting what it sounds like they're affecting in the image. The exposure is the total brightness of the image. If you crank it to the right, it gets brighter. If you crank it to the left, it gets darker. Oh, there's a contrast slider too. Contrast is basically how much separation there is between those values. Your white balance, again, if you slide it left towards the blue, it's introducing more blue into your image. If you slide it right towards the orange, it's introducing more orange to your image. Tint is magenta or pink and green. And again, same concept. So if you've got a shot that's too orange, you're going to want to slide that towards the blue side. If you got a shot that's too green, you want to slide it towards the pink side. And sometimes you're kind of fiddling with both of those things at the same time. Then you've got your highlights and shadows. And essentially what that's doing is Premiere has mathematically decided a range of luminance values that it considers to be highlights and what it considers to be shadows. Basically, if you like split up that waveform into like 4 quadrants, your middle 2 quadrants are going to be your highlights on the brighter side and your shadows on the darker side. So when you increase those highlights, it's just going to increase the brightness of the values that are inside of that range that Premiere has set. Same thing with the shadows. And then when you've got the whites and the blacks, your whites are your brightest areas of your image, and the blacks are the darkest areas of your image. And when you slide those back and forth, it's increasing or decreasing. The brightness of those values. And so for a very long time, probably for 5 or 6 years, that was my primary mode of color adjustment, was just those sliders, plus the vibrance and the saturation, which for the life of me, I've read it a million times, but I can't say it here. There is a difference between vibrance and saturation, but I don't know 100% what that difference is. Like I've read
There's a difference.
There's a difference.
I just can't tell you either. There is. If you go out and if you physically do it, it's fairly large difference between saturation and vibrance. Like you said, I can't tell you what the hell the difference is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know.
Technically.
No, I'd have to Google it. So, but you have those sliders as well, and they work the same way. To the right, more saturation, vibrance. To the left, less.
You can get pretty far with those sliders, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, for the longest time, that was essentially what I used the most of, and I use that and the waveform. And essentially, what I would be doing is I'd look at the image. If there was a color cast, I'd go to try to dial that in with the white balance sliders, and I'm just sliding them until it looks right. With the vector scope, you can like see that. You can see those colors getting changed. And then when you're looking at that waveform, what you're basically trying to do in the simplest terms is have an image that's kind of spread nicely across it, right? You don't want it to sit too high at the top. You don't want it to be all piled down at the bottom. You'll see those really bright points. You want to bring those down past that 100 mark. And I kind of like to kiss them, right? If I've got like a white, I know I've got something white in there and it should be bright, I like to kiss it right up to the top and then bring it back. Same thing with those blacks. I like to make sure that I'm just taking the really darkest part of my image and just kind of kissing that bottom line with them. So I know I have black blacks and white whites. And then depending on the image, you're kind of dialing everything else in around that. And like, some images don't have white whites or black blacks, but for the most part, if you do that and then you're looking at it and you're like, okay, well, this guy's face is kind of a little too dark, slide those shadows up. If the sky looks a little too bright, slide those highlights down, and same thing with exposure. If the whole thing is too dark, bump it up. If the whole thing is too bright, bump it down. And really the best way to figure out how to do it is just take an image and start sliding things around and seeing how it affects your image, what parts of it affects, and getting to that point where you're like, okay, I want this here. This looks good. This doesn't look good. All this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Past doing that, I mean, there's a ton of other controls in Lumetri. There's the curves, which I tend to use a lot more now. They do kind of the same thing as the sliders do, except for you place your own points. And so you're kind of deciding what ranges to affect instead of Premiere having those ranges set. And so I use those a lot because it allows me to really dial in the different parts of the image I want to affect and by how much. And then you've got your, inside the curves, you also have your RGB curves, which you can help dial in different color casts with those as well, but I'm not going to get into that. And then you've got your HSL sliders, which are all of your colors, your luminance, your basically your hue, your saturation, your luminance. And so you can use those to help dial in different colors specifically in your image. So like if you've got a green and you don't like that color of the green, you can slide that green hue slider and it'll actually change the color of that green. If the greens are too bright, you can slide that luminescence slider and it'll darken them or brighten them. If the greens are too saturated, you can slide it and make them less saturated or make them more saturated. And so that's a great way of, if you're looking at an image and you're like, I don't really like this color in there, or it needs to be brighter or darker or whatever, that's what those HSL sliders are for.
Which will happen a lot.
Yes.
And then some cameras, and then also this kind of gets back into color profiles and all that, but some cameras are going to have more ability to adjust those colors than others. For example, like RFX6s are going to have more dynamic range to move colors up and move colors down, or get more correct colors than take like a A7 III or something. Both good cameras. One's got more range and more flexibility, and one doesn't. But that's also probably another topic for another day.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, you're getting a lot into color space.
Yeah.
Again, the 709, the logs, and then you're also getting into 8, 10, 14, 16-bit, color depth and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which, is a lot of a lot of technical talk. Some
But
cameras,
I'll tell you what, if you sign up for the Red Dot Tech class, we can go over all of that for days.
Bits. Just bits for days.
8-bit, 10-bit, whatever you want, we can go over it.
Hey, Joe, I like big bits, and I cannot lie. The more bits, the better.
I do not like big bits, if I'm being honest. What else you got in the docket?
Well, I'm trying to think of anything else I want to say about color. Color's hard to talk about on a podcast because unless I show you certain things, it doesn't really click. I guess balancing shots and matching shots, that's like an important part of the process. Again, a lot of that is like if you've got two separate cameras both shooting the same person, and they're from two different camera manufacturers, the images off those cameras are going to look different. And so you have to actually match those images. And a lot of that is dialing in those colors and the curves and stuff like that until they look like each other. And again, it's one of those things where you take the reference monitor in Premiere and you put it up, and then you take the clip that you're working on and put it up, and you're just kind of sliding and tweaking until it all looks close.
Can be extremely tedious.
Very tedious, very nitpicky. I mean, you're getting into a lot of times you're getting into you're changing gamma curves, you're messing with the HSL sliders, you might be adding color casts to one, all that kind of stuff just to get them to match. And then I
absolutely despise that.
Yeah, I hate it. I'm glad
I hate it.
I'm glad we don't have to do it as much anymore.
Yeah.
We're all shooting the same stuff.
Right.
And again, from shot to shot, on one of the boot leather trips, Joe and I were shooting the same camera. Both shooting the same model of camera. We weren't tag teaming one camera. We're both shooting our own camera, but it was the same type of camera. And Just wanted to make that clear.
We were both pressing buttons on
Yeah.
one camera.
Which on a Hollywood film set is not unheard of. In fact, that's the
Yeah.
norm.
We were just tag teaming it.
Yeah. But you may have to match shot to shot. And as you're coloring, you want to make sure that your shots look similar, right? If you're shooting a scene and you go from one shot and it's really orange and the next shot's really blue, well, that, messes everything up. There's no continuity
Yeah.
of that aesthetic. And so as you're color grading, that's something you got to keep in mind, is you want the shots to all look like they exist in the same aesthetic universe, in the same color universe that you've set and decided for them. And so, you can't just color every shot to where it looks good by itself. You got to color it so that it looks good by itself, but also matches the last shot and the previous shot and all the other shots. Like, they don't have to be copies, but they got to look like they all flow together.
Can't be jarring.
Right.
Because it is very jarring if you have one clip, like, and then the next one is like in the same area and it looks totally different. That drives me absolutely insane.
Yeah, like you'll have one that's too dark and then the next one's way brighter and stuff like that. So you want to be dialing them in so that they look well meshed together. Just the same as like when you're transitioning audio clips, you don't want one clip to be 15 decibels and the other one to be 7 decibels, because that change is very noticeable. You just want to make sure they're all kind of matching and looking similar. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was LUTs. One, because I feel like people misuse them, and two, to explain what they are. A LUT is a lookup table. What a LUT is supposed to be is a mathematical equation that converts colors and luminances and exposures and all of these values that are mathematically in the computer to other values. It's basically like a Rosetta Stone for color in a way. So I have these colors, but I want it to look like this. And so I use a LUT that's supposed to mathematically convert this into this look. And I think they serve a lot of awesome purposes. And if used right, they're a phenomenal tool. What they are not is a fix-all. And they are also not a, hey, I want my video to look cool, I'm going to go find this Mad Max Fury Road LUT and throw it over the top of it. Like, that's not what a LUT is.
No.
And
we've all done that. But
yeah, I have. We have.
Blue and teal LUT, dude, over the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. And you're like, man, that looks pimp. And then 2 years later, you're like, God, I want to slap myself like a pimp.
Jesus
right
Christ,
now.
that's terrible.
Yeah. So there's also two different types of LUTs. You've got utility LUTs and like color space conversion LUTs, and you've got creative LUTs. We use color space conversion LUTs a lot, especially now that we're shooting log. You have to have a color space conversion LUT to convert from log into Rec 709, and that's a mathematical conversion. People way smarter than me have already done it, and Premiere knows how to do it, and I'm glad they made the files, because I don't want to have to do that by hand. Or like they make LUTs where if I needed to convert like a red clip to an ARRI, like I wanted it to look like ARRI color, like they have LUTs for that.
Right.
So that's what a utility LUT is. It's essentially converting a color space. It's doing a mathematical conversion. Your creative LUTs are, like I said, a Mad Max Fury Road LUT. Like, I want it to look like Mad Max. LUTs are not a fix-all. You can't just throw a LUT over your stuff and it's going to look like that. Especially like when you're talking about Hollywood director stuff. I mean, they are using professional colorists, one, but also they're shooting to a specific end, and the way that they shot and how they exposed and the colors that they used in their set design, the cameras they used, the lenses they used, all of those things were in service to this final look. So like, I can't just go take my FX6 and go shoot a turkey film in like available lighting and throw a Mad Max LUT on it and be like, oh man, this thing looks like it's post-apocalyptic Mad Max. Like, it's just not going to work that way, because I didn't shoot it like they shot Mad Max.
Yeah.
Now, could I maybe replicate it? Sure. It would take a lot more manual work, but you can't just throw on a creative LUT and expect that your stuff is going to look like it does in Hollywood. It's just not going to. The other thing is, a LUT is based on the assumption that the footage underneath that LUT, or the footage that LUT is being applied to, has been corrected and is technically correct. So if you just have your footage and like maybe you shot it perfectly, but you probably didn't, because I don't shoot all my footage perfectly. So I know like everybody out there is not shooting all their footage perfectly. Like it just doesn't happen like that. So you can't just take your footage, dump it in Premiere, and then throw a LUT on it and go, yeah, this is going to be good. Like even to use a LUT and take advantage of that, you still have to color correct your footage to get it into those technical specs to where that mathematical conversion is working. You know, like just if you're in math class and you've got an equation, or like science class, physics, right? If you've got this equation and you're using, there's a constant number in that equation that you've got to use, like gravity, right? If you ever took physics, gravity is a certain number. There's a certain meters per second squared that represents gravity. And if you don't use the correct number in your equation, you're not going to get the right answer. And it's the same thing with your footage. If that footage isn't within the bounds that LUT expects for it to be in, then your result is not going to be the same. So LUTs are a great tool. There's a lot of purposes for LUTs, but they're not a replacement for color correction. And they're not like an easy way to get your stuff to have this like beautiful cinematic color grade.
No.
It's just not. It's just not how it is.
No, you can try, but it's not going to work.
Yeah, and that's just the facts of it. So
somebody's knocking very loudly at my door.
Yeah, I've missed like 3 calls. So
yeah, I think it's my daughter.
She's like, get off that podcast.
Yeah, for those of you that can't see, my 5-year-old daughter has meandered her way into my studio. She's now currently here, blanket in hand.
Well, I think we've
right signifying the end of the podcast.
I think so. I think Ranger's fully asleep at my feet, which doesn't happen unless I sit still for like an hour and a half. So
yeah, and if anyone knows Ranger, he is not a chill dog. So.
No, he's not a sit still dog. So I think that's everything. I mean, it's 3 hours of information. If y'all didn't learn something from that, then just quit listening.
Yeah,
because we ain't got
and we're always available all our personal Instagrams, or the Redneck Tech Instagram, or the Copeland Creative one.
Yep, we're always happy to help. If any of these things were confusing or want some more clarification on them or want to dive deeper into something, let us know. If you want us to do a deeper dive into any of these topics, hit us up and we can always do a podcast on that. But with that being said, we are going to sign out, and we will see y'all again next time. Peace.
Cool.